Chapter 365. Who am I? Yun Yang finally came to a realization. I am the one who wields the saber. Wielding the saber means wielding the power. The power of life and death is in my hands. Since I have the saber in my hands, I shall carve out a clear sky for this world. All the injustice, all the injustice, all the injustice, all the evil, shall vanish under my saber. Only then can a man not wield the saber in vain. To wield the saber is to obey the will of heaven, the divine edge. All the evils in this world are my enemies, the rivers of blood shall flow as I slaughter them all. There is reincarnation under the saber, no matter how many grudges there are, this saber shall collect them all. I see. This is the duty of a saber wielder. Yun Yang grew more spirited, feeling that his mental state had advanced to another level through this battle. On the other side, Venerable Lord Ice could already feel that he could not hold on any longer. This little monster had used him to practice his saber skills over and over again, yet each time he did so, the power of his saber skills would increase. There were no less than 100 crisscrossed wounds on his body now. Even if these injuries did not hurt his tendons or bones, nor was there any threat to his life, the bleeding alone had already made him exceptionally weak. This was King Death by 1,000 cuts in disguise. Along the way his clothes had been white at the beginning. Wherever he passed by he was like a white line or a wisp of white smoke. But now, his entire body was bathed in blood. His trajectory in the sky was like a red line, a line of blood. Yet Yun Yang was still in that state and had yet to come out. No matter how much you care for this child, you shouldn't have gone overboard and made it so obvious. This is the trend of playing me to death. Throughout the entire chase, with his 9th heaven pinnacle cultivation base, he had never once landed to catch his breath. Yet this fellow behind him could not land and catch his breath the entire time as well. Was there any justice in this world? If you're so capable, go straight to heaven. Venerable Lord Ice felt like crying. Who am I? How did I encounter such a thing? At this moment a long howl rang out. A white silhouette approached swiftly from afar and hollered from afar, "Fourth brother, stop. Don't kill Yun Yang, have mercy." It was Venerable Lord Snow. Once Venerable Lord Ice heard this, he was almost tearing up. Kill Yun Yang? I wish I could. But now, I'm the one being hunted. Show mercy? Are you King blind or what? If I hold back, I'll be finished in an instant. What's going on today? The great Tao is messing with me, the young man behind me is messing with me, and now even my own brothers are messing with me. What's wrong with me? Venerable Lord Snow was anxious, fearing that Venerable Lord Ice had already caught up with Yun Yang and killed him. If so, Venerable Lord Sword would not be saved. Previously he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to catch up, but now he was afraid that he would kill him. This change in mentality was too fast. But the psychological changes were definitely not as good as the shock before their eyes. No matter how Venerable Lord Snow imagined it, he could only imagine Yun Yang being killed, severely injured, captured alive, and the most impossible scenario where Yun Yang continued to flee. Of course, the last scenario was what he was most happy to see, even more so than being captured alive. Only when the initiative fell into the hands of the weaker party with a certain amount of combat power would the weaker party be willing to compromise, allowing both parties to have a chance to turn the situation around. However, when Venerable Lord Snow sped up to take a look, he let out a cry of surprise when he saw the situation before him. With a groan, he straightened his neck, his face contorted into a hideous grimace. He was dumbfounded. What's going on? Venerable Lord Snow cried out in shock. Because the scene before their eyes had truly exceeded their expectations. In reality, it was not his 4th brother who was chasing after someone else. It was someone else who was chasing after his 4th brother with a saber. His 4th brother, who was supposed to have the absolute upper hand and should not have any problems, was now bathed in blood. No, he was already covered in blood. What do you mean, what's going on? Venerable Lord Ice cried out in frustration. King Hell, what are you waiting for? Save me. You're not here to laugh at me, are you? You're doing it again. It was Yun Yang who was chanting again, reincarnation under the saber. Venerable Lord Ice executed his ultimate movement skill desperately as he cried out anxiously, "Hurry up! Stop!" Venerable Lord Snow hollered, his voice rumbling. With a wave of his arms, countless snowflake blades covered the sky and charged over, joining the battle forcefully. Venerable Lord Ice let out a roar upon seeing the situation and retaliated with all his might. It had become a battle between the Four Seasons Tower's venerable lords against Yun Yang. Yun Yang, who was in a mystical state, could, of course, maintain his advantage when facing Venerable Lord Ice alone. he could even win. However, with the sudden intervention of a strong enemy and the simultaneous assault of two spiritual forces, the unexpected turn of events caused his aura that was already at its peak to plummet. It was also because of this that the mystical state came to a halt. Yun Yang's consciousness returned to his body at once, escaping from the mystical state. The moment he regained his senses, what greeted his eyes was the oncoming assault of countless snowflake blades and ice blades. The exhaustion that had accumulated earlier came crashing down on him. His bones felt like they were about to fall apart. Even lifting his hand was an arduous task. Destiny is like a saber. Yun Yang roared, mustering all his remaining strength to execute the saber truth. Destiny blades 3 styles and 6 styles at the same time, intending to turn the tide. The saber wind howled, filling the sky with an imposing aura. It was a pity that Yun Yang was no longer in the state of epiphany. He could no longer pinpoint the flaws of his opponent's attacks. The three forces collided abruptly. As for the unassuming impact of the force, the stronger one would win, the weaker one would lose. How could Yun Yang be lucky? With a loud cry, blood splattered from his body as he spat a mouthful of blood and fell far away. Venerable Lord Snow was shocked, retracting his snowflake blades hastily, afraid that the aftermath would claim Yun Yang's life. He was increasingly confused about the situation. It was Yun Yang who was chasing after Venerable Lord Ice and had the upper hand. Venerable Lord Snow had only managed to push his attack to 80% despite his scruples when he joined the battle. It was because of this that he had the remaining strength to extinguish the aftermath. How could Yun Yang, who had the upper hand of Venerable Lord Ice, be so vulnerable? It did not make sense. Just as Venerable Lord Snow was puzzled, a few roars could be heard. "Don't you dare hurt my young master." Feng Mafei, Bai Yixue and Lao Mei dashed out at the same time. Far away there were silhouettes flashing about. "Go!" Dong Qianling took the lead, charging forward. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. 20 silhouettes followed him, rushing to his aid. What's the harm in dying together today? Dong Qianling was no longer the joker he used to be. Instead he guffawed, his wildness evident. "Come, let's fight to our heart's content." With a slap on his waist, the treasured sword, Spirited Krite, appeared in his hand. Like a flood dragon, he charged towards Venerable Lord Snow. The eyes of the others who came with him all turned red. They unleashed their full power and attacked with all their might. Kill? For a moment, their aura was unstoppable. Venerable Lord Snow was fuming. If his intention was to chase after Yun Yang and even eliminate all of his henchmen, he had full confidence that he could wipe out more than 90% of these fellows in front of him with just one attack. However, he could not. He was not here to kill. He was even praying that the attack just now would not hurt Yin Yang's core. Otherwise, it would be inevitable that he would perish together with Yun Yang. The lives of Yun Yang and the others could be taken later, but Venerable Lord Sword's life was at stake. He had to be saved as soon as possible. In Venerable Lord Snow's heart, it was fine not to kill Yun Yang. After all, their target was only Lei Dongtian. As long as Yun Yang was willing to give the antidote, everything could be discussed. Wait. Venerable Lord Snow roared, "Stop, all of you. Stop if you don't want to die." Far away, Yun Yang stood up shakily and hollered from afar, "Stop." Yun Yang was truly burning with anxiety at this point. He knew clearly what kind of enemy he was facing now and how strong he was. Dong Qianling and the others were like a group of children facing a giant in front of Venerable Lord Snow. Even if they were to give it their all, there was no chance of winning. There was only death. There was absolutely no room for luck. As long as Venerable Lord Snow made his move, the situation would be irreversible. There would be casualties. At this moment, Yun Yang's face was pale with fright. Amidst the fear, a sliver of hope suddenly rose in his mind. Previously, Yun Yang's deific consciousness had left his body and reached the 9 heavens to observe the entire battle. It was because of Venerable Lord Snow's entry into the battle and the impact of the intervention of another deific consciousness that Yun Yang could no longer bear, causing him to lose his state of epiphany. This caused the situation to take a turn for the worse. However, Venerable Lord Snow's arrival was not entirely a bad thing. Although he had entered the battle, he did not exert his full strength. He had even stopped in time when he had the upper hand and eliminated the impact of the impact. In addition, he had said to show mercy when he arrived. All of these indicated that the situation had changed. At the very least, he did not want to kill Yun Yang immediately. Whether his purpose was Lei Dongtian's whereabouts or some other reason, things had not reached the extreme yet. There was still room for improvement. This meant that the situation had taken a turn for the better. Yun Yang was acutely aware of this. Hearing Venerable Lord Snow and Yun Yang's call to stop almost at the same time, Lao Mei Dong Tianling and the others were all stunned. Their cultivation base was far from being able to control it as they wished. They had attacked with all their might, fearing that their attacks would never end. Even if they wanted to stop now, it was too late. Countless attacks were still focused on Venerable Lord Snow. Venerable Lord Snow roared and retreated immediately. One of his hands quickly pulled Venerable Lord Ice, who was about to counterattack. His other hand made a circle in the air, and the snow within 100 feet radius flew up at the same time, condensing into a thick snow wall in front of him. Poof, poof, countless attacks landed on the snow wall, causing it to explode in an instant. However, the group's attacks had also come to an end. Venerable Lord Snow roared once again, "Stop, stop. Misunderstanding. This is a misunderstanding." Hearing these words, not only were Dong Tianling and the others stunned, even Yun Yang almost fell to the ground. The weather had suddenly turned cold. Yun Yang's fingers felt stiff when he was writing. His fingers were especially stiff, so he placed them under his clothes and placed them on his belly to keep them warm. This was a great idea. As he placed them in, he shuddered and his spirits were lifted. Chapter 366. Misunderstanding? How could he say that? How was he supposed to explain it? Even when Yun Yang had a premonition that there must be a reason for Venerable Lord Snow to be merciful, he was still baffled. "Lord Venerable Lord Snow, how could you say the word misunderstanding? In what state of mind? The Four Seasons Tower has come with the intention to kill. First, it was the four Venerable Lords who joined forces to fight Lei Dongtian and Old Mu. Then even Mr. Nian has come personally and destroyed my residence of Yun. Now you're telling me that this is a misunderstanding? Is this how you use the word misunderstanding?" Venerable Lord Ice turned his head abruptly and looked at his second brother in shock, his eyeballs almost popping out of their sockets. "Second brother, what do you mean by this? I was almost cut into pieces just now and you're jumping out to say that it's a misunderstanding? Do you want to reconcile with the other party and be a gentleman's friend? Just now, you purposely stopped my counterattack, lest I take the opportunity to kill that group of ants. What are you trying to do?" Venerable Lord Snow was frustrated as well. "I don't want it to be a misunderstanding either. However, my boss has been poisoned and is about to die. What can I do? I'm also feeling very frustrated." He sighed and said, "I've come with no ill intentions. I'd like to discuss something with young Master Yun." Yun Yang staggered over and asked suspiciously, "Discuss something?" Yun Yang had thought that the situation had taken a turn for the better because of the other party's actions, but he still could not figure out what request the other party had for him to be so humble. Although Yun Yang had considered turning the current situation around, such as giving up on Lei Dongtian or even killing him himself to ease the Four Seasons Tower's murderous intent, he had immediately given up on the idea. Lei Dongtian was already on the brink of death and his corpse was not far away. He could not be used as a bargaining chip. Then where would he have the bargaining chip to negotiate with the Four Seasons Tower? Fang Mafei and Lao Mei took a step forward and supported Yun Yang from both sides. They could see that Yun Yang was very weak now. Yun Yang ordered, "Bai Yi, bring Lei Dongtian over." Bai Yishue responded and returned with Lei Dongtian in his arms. "Young master, he has fainted." Yun Yang's eyes darted around as he walked forward to check the man's pulse. Nodding, he sighed and stuffed a few medicinal pills into the man's mouth. Then he touched the man's neck and applied force. Now, even if Lei Dongtian recovered, he would not be able to wake up in a short period of time. "I wonder what revered Lord Snow wants to discuss with me?" Yun Yang was aware that the other party must have something to ask of him, or else he would not have spoken in such a manner. He had to grab hold of this turning point. Otherwise, when the war broke out again, the rest of them would inevitably perish here, except for a few who would have the chance to escape. As for the few who managed to escape, it would only be possible if they exposed their identity as Supreme Wind. Yes, it was only a possibility. Therefore, now that the other party had taken the initiative to say that he had something to discuss with him, then let's talk. He would know what was going on after the conversation. Even if they could not come to an agreement, it would not be too late to run away. Lei Dongtian had been knocked out anyway. Most importantly, Yun Yang felt that he really did not have the slightest bit of strength left. It would be good to recover some of his energy during the negotiation. Recalling that he had just inexplicably entered that wonderful state, he had practiced the saber truth, Destiny Blade on Venerable Lord Ice more than 100 times. Just thinking about it made Yun Yang speechless. He would usually be exhausted after practicing it 3 to 4 times. Even if his cultivation base had improved tremendously and he had reached the heaven realm, he could only do it 2 to 3 more times. This time he had used it more than 100 times in such an extreme battle. How had he managed to persevere? It was exhilarating to suppress Venerable Lord Ice previously, but now there was not a single part of his bones, joints and muscles that did not ache. It was extremely difficult to endure. It was said that after doing it for too long, there would be backache the next day. How would it compare to now? Let's cut to the chase. Bring me the antidote quickly. Venerable Lord Snow was so anxious that his eyes were about to split open. Once he spoke, he went straight to the point, stating the crux of the matter. After all, Venerable Lord Sword's condition was dire. Any slight delay could lead to an irreversible outcome. Antidote? Yun Yang's mind was sharp. He understood everything at once and even knew the other party's intention. He laughed and said, "How could Venerable Lord Sword be so careless? Not only was he injured but he was also poisoned?" Venerable Lord Snow snorted, "Cut the nonsense. There's no need to ask when you already know the answer." In fact, he was a little surprised. Why did this fellow insist that it was Venerable Lord Sword who was injured and not someone else? Yun Yang chuckled, "I was the one who poisoned him. Of course I have the antidote." Venerable Lord Snow gritted his teeth, his eyes spitting fire. "Hand over the antidote and I'll spare your lives." He knew that he would have to pay a considerable price to obtain the antidote. Thus, he took the initiative to retreat in order to obtain the antidote as soon as possible and save Venerable Lord Sword's life. "You could have killed me and searched for the antidote on me. Wouldn't that be more convenient?" Yun Yang reminded kindly. The muscles on Venerable Lord Snow's face twitched. "If I could do that, would I still need you to remind me? How could a cunning person like you keep the antidote on you? Even if you had the antidote on you, how would you know which was the right medicine? What do you want? Say it." Venerable Lord Snow said angrily, "Time is of the essence. It's the same for you and for us. If my eldest brother can't be saved, none of you will be able to live." How could Yun Yang not understand the crux of the matter? He could not delay the delivery of the antidote for too long. Once it was delayed for too long, Venerable Lord Sword would definitely die, but not many of them would be able to survive by then. What Yun Yang needed to do now was to not let Venerable Lord Sword die and fight for the most advantageous conditions for his side. "What's wrong, boss?" Venerable Lord Ice finally understood what had happened. It also indirectly explained the reason for Venerable Lord Snow's series of abnormal actions. "Poisoned, the poison of blood coagulation," Venerable Lord Snow uttered word by word. As he explained, his eyes were still fixed on Yun Yang, observing his every move. "You're right. Time is not good for both of us. However, I can still wait for a while." Yun Yang said calmly, "If we can't come to an agreement, I'm afraid we'll still have to die even if I save your Venerable Lord Sword. Therefore, the most important thing now is for both parties to reach a consensus. Yun Yang won't do something like shooting myself in the foot, but I won't blindly follow and believe blindly either." Venerable Lord Snow said impatiently, "Tell me, what conditions do you want? What is the so-called consensus?" Yun Yang said faintly, "I have 3 conditions. Firstly, today's matter shall end here. Secondly, don't look for trouble with me and my friends in the future. Thirdly, the 4 Seasons Tower's forces must leave Yutong immediately. If you agree, I'll give you the antidote." Venerable Lord Snow refused resolutely, "This is impossible. My brother's revenge must be avenged no matter what. Lei Dongtian must die. The most I can do is promise that I won't attack him today." Yun Yang sighed, "I didn't say that you can't seek revenge from Lei Dongtian. Previously, Lei Dongtian was a guest in the residence of Yun. As the host, I can't let anything happen to the guest of the residence of Yun in my residence. However, I won't intervene in the grudge between you two except for today. Not today, that's all." Venerable Lord Snow's eyes shone. "You're really only going to let Lei Dongtian go today?" Compared to killing Lei Dongtian, Venerable Lord Sword's life was more important. If Yun Yang had insisted on protecting Lei Dongtian, Venerable Lord Snow had already decided to give in temporarily and change his mind after obtaining the antidote. However, Yun Yang had suddenly changed the topic and set a time limit for not killing Lei Dongtian. The situation was vastly different, at least within Venerable Lord Snow's original limit. Yun Yang sighed and said, "I'm the heir of the residence of Marquis after all. The dignity of the royal family will never allow a guest to seek revenge and kill when he's a guest in my residence. Especially when the 4 Seasons Tower has targeted Yutong so many times previously, our standpoints are completely opposite. Not only should I not help, I can't help. There's one more thing. Lei Dongtian and I are good friends. When he comes to Tiantang City in the future, he might look for me again. I hope that you won't find trouble with me because of this. Yun Yang put on a sincere expression and said, speaking from the bottom of my heart, I've never thought of going against the Four Seasons Tower for a long time from the beginning. Since there's a buffer between us now, I also hope that we can bury the hatchet. After all, it's hard to sleep peacefully if you provoke the Four Seasons Tower. Venerable Lord Snow gritted his teeth in hatred. Our fifth brother is already dead, yet you still want to bury the hatchet with us? I don't understand what you mean. Venerable Lord Snow gritted his teeth and said, speak freely. Simply put, the Four Seasons Tower is not allowed to find trouble with me no matter when or where. Even if Lei Dongtian has nowhere else to go and comes to my house, you're not allowed to come in and kill him. Yun Yang said, is this clear enough? Venerable Lord Snow was furious. Then when we fight Lei Dongtian in the future and he can't defeat us, he'll come to your house to rest. He'll come out and fight us after he's rested enough? Yun Yang smiled. Your understanding is completely correct. That's what I mean. Now you understand what I mean. Venerable Lord Snow was so angry that he could not speak. Outrageous. This is absolutely impossible. I thought that you had some sincerity when I heard what you said earlier. Now it seems that you're simply asking for a sky-high price and talking nonsense. Chapter 367. Seeing that Venerable Lord Snow was still gritting his teeth in contemplation, Yun Yang smiled and said, I shouldn't disturb Venerable Lord Snow's deliberation, but time is really running out. Venerable Lord Snow, you have to make up your mind as soon as possible. Right, the compensation for the Four Seasons Tower's damage to the Yun family's residence cannot be omitted. The residence of Heavenly Clouds is the head of Yutong's noble families. Their treasures have been plentiful over the years. Now that it's all destroyed, when my father returns, I won't be able to explain myself. Venerable Lord Snow gritted his teeth so hard that they almost fell off. He cursed in his heart, what the hell are you talking about? The previous 3 conditions were already outrageous, and now you're asking for a mile after being given an inch. What compensation for the destruction of the residence of Heavenly Clouds? How fortunate must your father be to have such a family-minded son? However, Yun Yang's words tugged at Venerable Lord Snow's heartstrings. There was not much time left. All right, 3 conditions it is. Venerable Lord Snow swallowed his anger. First, hand over the antidote. No, it's 4 conditions now. You've been hesitating for too long. Yun Yang was unruffled. Now that the other party had expressed their intention to submit, he could easily stir up trouble. Venerable Lord Ice moved closer to Venerable Lord Snow's ear and whispered, why do we have to be so humble? We can totally capture their people as hostages. If they don't give us the antidote, we'll kill a few of them first and then a few more. Let's see how hard that brat's heart can be. Wouldn't it be easier to exchange for the antidote? Venerable Lord Snow sighed. How could he not know of such a method and not have thought of it? But the problem was, this group of people were already at the end of their rope, and they only had the antidote as their last hope. Once it was given out, they would immediately become lambs waiting to be slaughtered, and their lives would be thrown away. With this as the premise, how could they care about how many people died? Yun Yang, in particular, was not a ruthless character who could be pushed to the brink of death. If it were not so, why would this child help Lei Dongtian to fight against the Four Seasons Tower? Even when Lei Dongtian was defeated, he did not give up and stood by the tower from the beginning to the end. How could a few lives sway such a person? Venerable Lord Snow had long seen through the situation. Rather than doing useless work, it was better to solve the problem as soon as possible. Yun Yang smiled and said, has Venerable Lord Ice given Venerable Lord Snow a good idea? I wonder if Venerable Lord Snow will capture our people to exchange for the antidote? This idea is really not bad. This Yun has always been loyal to his friends, so there really is a high chance that he will give in. Venerable Lord Ice lifted his head abruptly, his eyes wide. How did you know? Yun Yang snorted. Look at how sneaky you are, it's almost as if your intentions are written all over your face. Is it that hard to guess? Venerable Lord Snow took a deep breath and said, there is no need to complicate matters. I promise to agree to all your conditions. However, I want to see the antidote first. Yun Yang smiled and said, Venerable Lord Snow must be joking. How is that possible? The antidote was the only life-saving straw that Yun Yang had. How could he take it out so easily? If he did, it would be akin to giving it to the enemy for free and allowing them to massacre him. Venerable Lord Ice had just finished treating his wounds and said angrily, Yun, don't go overboard. Yun Yang snorted and said, Venerable Lord Ice, being retarded is an illness. Don't hide it for fear of treatment. If you don't know how to speak, or if you really can't see the situation before you, it's best that you shut up. The situation before us is obvious. Only if you show your sincerity first, then this deal will be possible. If we go back on our words, you can kill us anytime. However, if we give out the antidote first, who will guarantee our safety? The 5 venerable lords may be reputable, but the promise, it's laughable. Venerable Lord Ice was infuriated by Yun Yang's words. Ever since he had met Yun Yang, he had failed to catch up to him, he could not defeat him in a battle of sabers, and now that they were engaged in a verbal battle, the disparity in strength was even greater. He was not an opponent of the same weight class. However, Venerable Lord Snow snorted but was not enraged. It was obvious that he felt that Yun Yang's words were reasonable. In fact, Venerable Lord Snow had indeed thought of reneging on his promise once the antidote was in his hands. After all, the other party would never have the ability to escape from their grasp. However, Yun Yang had long been prepared. This path was no longer viable. Besides, even if it's just buying a bunch of vegetables, it's only proper to hand over the money and the goods at the same time. Yun Yang rolled his eyes and said, "It's such a huge deal now. How can it be neglected? Therefore, a heaven's oath is a must at the very least." Yun Yang watched as Venerable Lord Snow made the oath and obtained the recognition of heaven's will. He then smilingly collected a considerable sum of money, 10 million silver taels. Of course, Yun Yang did not care too much about the exact amount of compensation. What he cared about was the disgust and the interesting expression on Venerable Lord Snow's face when he fished out the silver taels. Was he here for revenge? He was obviously a fortune teller who was here to give away the silver taels. Was there such a grievous revenge? We are the Four Seasons Tower. What happened to the proclamation of martial arts and the bloodbath of the martial world? The deal is done. Saving people is imperative. It's an urgent matter. Right, where is he? Yun Yang was in a good mood. Naturally he had to get down to business. After all, it was now Yun Yang's turn to be more concerned about Venerable Lord Sword's injuries. He could not allow anything to happen to this old brother of his. If he were to die first, he would have to be buried with him. He's at the residence of Yun. Let's go quickly. Venerable Lord Snow was extremely frustrated. He had been threatened for no reason and had even been forced to make a heaven's vow. No one could stand it. However, Venerable Lord Snow did not think that he had done anything wrong. He also did not think that letting Yun Yang go would cause too much of a loss to the Four Seasons Tower. After all, in his heart, Yun Yang was only an insignificant character who had been involved for no reason. Even if he was a citizen of Yutong and a noble of Yutong, he was still insignificant and unimportant. The most important thing was only Lei Dongtian. Even if he did not find trouble with Yun Yang, what could he do? At most, everyone would mind their own business. You stay in your Tiantang city and we will dominate our martial world. If Yun Yang was determined to be the Four Seasons Tower's enemy and collude with Lei Dongtian, he would definitely make a move against the Four Seasons Tower first. By then, the promise this time would naturally be nullified and he would not let it go. However, according to what Yun Yang had said, he seemed to have expressed his intention to escape. As you wish then. As long as you do not interfere with the matter between us and Lei Dongtian, we are actually not willing to be the enemy of an imperial noble. As a martial world force, it was never worthwhile to be the enemy of a dynasty. After all, the Four Seasons Tower still had a lot of business to do in the secular world. If the Empire of Yutong was determined to go against the Four Seasons Tower, the Four Seasons Tower would have to bear a huge loss as well. Then they would guard the residence of Yun's door. As long as Lei Dongtian appeared before the other party could make the first move, the 4 territories would be activated immediately. Would they still have to be afraid of the bastard escaping? As the group walked back, Yun Yang naturally took the lead, increasing his speed to a relatively high level. He had thought that the residence of Yun would be destroyed, but he had never expected that there would be a day when it would return to its rightful owner. Previously, it was only to increase the lethality of the White Feather's ability to protect themselves. Unexpectedly, it had produced such a great effect. It was truly a miraculous claw, a godly claw. Venerable Lord Ice and Venerable Lord Snow walked alongside him. Bai Yixue carried Lei Dongtian while Lao Mei and Fang Mafei followed by Yun Yang's side. These people looked frail, their combat power less than a third of their peak state. There was also Dong Qianling and the other 4 men. Yun Yang's piercing glare had frightened these 4 loyal brothers of his into perishing together with their boss into oblivion. Each of them shrunk their heads like quails as they followed behind with drooping heads. As for the 17 people from the 4 noble families, they breathed a sigh of relief in unison, following behind with exceptionally relaxed moods. They had come with the intention to die, but in the end they did not have to die. The relief they felt was indescribable. No matter who it was, no matter what the reason was, if they could avoid death or even complete their mission without any losses, anyone would be elated and elated. Furthermore, the young master's gazes towards them were so warm, so close that they had never been before. If their young masters were to hold the power in their families in the future, they would be his unshakable, loyal subordinates. With such a loyal young master and a friend like young Master Yun supporting him, how could he not make a name for himself? It would be a joke if they could not stand out. However, it was only when they returned to the residence of Yun that they were all shocked. There was a huge crowd in front of the residence's gates. As far as the eye could see, it was filled with bright armor and surging killing intent. Sabers, spears, swords, and halberds glinted coldly in the snow-covered ground, making one shudder. There was a large number of disciplined troops gathered here. From a rough look, there were at least 30,000 of them. They surrounded the residence of Yun so tightly that not even a drop of water could pass through. The two people in the lead had white hair and beards, but they were like two tall and straight pine trees. One was holding a long spear and the other was holding a large saber. They were old generals with solemn faces, and their eyes were filled with grief, indignation, and heaviness. Who else could it be if not Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin? In the residence of Yun that had long been reduced to ruins, there was a cold aura circling back and forth, filled with vigilance and threat. Qiu Jianhan's voice was tinged with an almost uncontrollable anxiety. "Listen up, people inside. You've been surrounded. Come out quickly and surrender." There was no reply from inside, or perhaps they had no intention of paying attention. Qiu Jianhan's expression grew darker. His worry for Yun Yang made him unable to control himself any longer. With a wave of his hand, he was about to order an attack. Knowing that Yun Yang's residence of Yun had been attacked and turned into ashes, Qiu Jianhan almost broke down on the spot. After spending time together, Qiu Jianhan had long regarded Yun Yang as his own nephew. Hearing that something had happened here today, his heart felt like it was being torn apart, and it was difficult to suppress the pain. He did not even report to His Majesty the Emperor, but had used his authority to mobilize 30,000 imperial soldiers to surround the residence of Yun. "Do not target the culprit, interrogate him." The old marshal was enraged and anxious. If Yun Yang had met with any mishap, he would rather perish together to avenge this youth. No matter the cost. No matter the consequences. Even if he had to destroy the entire Tiantang city, he would not hesitate. Chapter 368. However, there was no movement in the ruins of the residence of Yun, but there was an inexplicable sense of frost lingering in the air. The sense of deterrence was unprecedented, and the scent of blood seemed to be thickening as well. Faced with such a situation, the old man could not help but feel his heart grow colder. Even his lips were trembling and his eyes were rimmed red. With a wave of his hand he said, "Soldiers, listen to my command." At this critical moment, a voice rang out hastily, Don't do it. "I'm here, I'm back." Qiu Jianhan shuddered when he heard the voice, turning his head abruptly towards the source of the voice. Amidst the snowstorm, a purple-clothed figure danced with joy as he ran over. His steps were relaxed and he was in high spirits. Was Yun Yang. The old marshal's eyes were almost filled with tears. He breathed a sigh of relief inwardly but roared angrily, "Little bastard! Where the F***ck did you run off to? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to bankrupt yourself?" The string of curses was like a barrage of cannons, but the old man's trembling voice had already betrayed his true feelings. Yun Yang felt a surge of warmth in his heart. He hurried to the old marshal and said in a low voice, "There's something fishy about this. There are still follow-up issues that need to be resolved as soon as possible. I'll explain in detail to you later. Let's retreat for now. We've gotten through this safely." Gotten through safely? The old marshal pointed at the ruins of the residence of Yun with a trembling finger. "There's not even a complete tile in your house and you're telling me that you're safe? Cough, something did happen just now but it's really fine now. There's really no time to dwell on these details now," Yun Yang explained rather anxiously. It was a waste of time to explain the whole story now. Once Venerable Lord Sword died, it would not just be the dozen or so people who would die, but the 30,000 imperial guards in front of him would all perish here. The difference in ability between a Heaven Realm cultivator and a 10th Perfection Realm cultivator of the Peak Realm was huge, especially when Venerable Lord Ice, Frost, and Snow's dominions were similar in power. When the three of them overlapped, their power was 10 times stronger than that of a single person. These Yutang men before him would not be able to inflict any damage at all, they would all die. Yunyang would never allow this to happen. Are you really fine? Old Marshal Lung Daoyin took a step forward and asked. I have to settle the aftermath of this, only then will I be truly fine. Yunyang nodded forcefully. Retreat 100 steps. Qiu Jinhan knew that something was amiss when he saw Yunyang's conflicted expression, so he gave the order without further ado. At his command, the army retreated in an orderly manner. Deicide archers prepare for battle. Heavy crossbowmen spread out in a fan formation. Arrows knocked on the bowstrings ready to fire. Heavy cavalry in the front, spears pointed forward. After Qiu Jinhan had ordered the troops to retreat, he issued another order in a chilling tone, obviously intending to intimidate the Four Seasons Tower's men so that they would not act rashly. While Yunyang lamented the futility of the old marshal's actions, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. Qiu Jinhan's icy gaze fell upon Venerable Lord Snow and the rest, laced with deep hatred and murderous intent. This old man knows that all of you are from the Four Seasons Tower. Our 9 Supremes Lords died under your conspiracy. This enmity is irreconcilable. Sooner or later I will settle this score with all of you. However, since Marquis Yun's heir has said that he has reached a consensus with all of you, as long as all of you stay in Tiantang City obediently and don't play any tricks, we can live in peace for now. On the other hand, we don't care if you're from the Four Seasons Tower or the 8 Seasons Tower. The Empire of Yutong will definitely use the entire nation's strength to fight the Four Seasons Tower to the end. Domineering. Yunyang only had this feeling in his heart. Venerable Lord Snow's face was dark, but he did not speak. At this moment he was actually thankful that he had not been too forceful in his negotiation with Yunyang, especially the decision to let Yunyang go. Looking at the people of Yutong, they had all gone mad. This old man in front of him, with his mediocre cultivation base, had dared to threaten him. What was even more unbelievable was that he had actually felt threatened. It was a threat that came from a superior who ruled over countless men's combat power. It was actually enough to form a strong pressure on him. Old Marshal, please calm down. I have something to settle first. I'll be out in a while. I'll definitely give Old Marshal a satisfactory answer. Yunyang smiled along, acting humble and subservient. Old Man Qiu behaved arrogantly. He raised his head and stuck out his beard as he said through gritted teeth, this old man will wait for your explanation. If it's not good enough, I'll *CK your buttocks. Yunyang shuddered. How could this old man's words be so vulgar and violent? Old Man Qiu's eerie gaze shifted to the 2 venerable lords from the Four Seasons Tower. With undisguised hatred, he snorted heavily and stared at them, retreating step by step. Among the troops, there was a group of people dressed in black armor that stood out from the rest. The person in front was tall and slender, her posture straight and her eyes filled with endless concern. It was Shangguan Lingxiu. The Shangguan family of generals had come to help as well. It was Shangguan Lingxiu who had personally led the troops. Her eyes stared at Yunyang quietly. Seeing that he was safe and sound, she quietly heaved a sigh of relief. She shrunk back and blended into the troop, not showing herself. Second uncle. Qiu Yunsan went forward to greet Qiu Jinhan. Scram? Qiu Jinhan hollered, I'm angrier when I see you than when I see your father. Qiu Yunsan was rebuffed, feeling ill all of a sudden. What kind of uncle is this? You care about Yunyang like your own son, but why do you look like you're seeing an enemy when you see your own nephew? I've been in Yutong for so many years that I'm not thinking straight anymore. What he did not see was the relief in the corners of Old Man Qiu's eyes. He had thought that this rascal was a useless and mischievous fellow. Who would have thought that he would be so lucky to have made such a good friend? Those who could befriend Yunyang and be acknowledged by the young Yun boy were not bad and had their own merits. When Yunyang saw Venerable Lord Sword, his eyelids twitched violently. How could he be so miserable? It was not that Yunyang's mental fortitude was lacking, but someone's condition was too terrible. It was obvious that he was on his last breath. His lower body was a bloody mess that could no longer be seen clearly. Yunyang only took a glance and quickly turned his head away. Firstly, this was someone's private part. It was inappropriate to look at it. Secondly, they were both men. When that thing was damaged, he could empathize with it. It was better not to look at it too much. What if it left a psychological scar? After all, Yunyang was still a virgin who had never done it before. He was still a little wary. Dong Qianling, on the other hand, was sizing up the man with interest. Under Venerable Lord Snow's glum gaze, he walked to the side awkwardly, thinking to himself, it's just a little bit. Not to mention that one is missing. Even if both of them are here, it doesn't seem to be of much use. Compared to his recent heroism, he could not help but grab at his crotch, thinking, My baby is much, much bigger than this sword's. How can the luminary paste be eaten for nothing? Thinking of this, Dong Qianling was unprecedentedly excited and cheerful, the smile on the corners of his lips growing wider. Xia Bingchuan looked at him baffled. What are you smiling at? We're all men, why are you behaving like this? Have you fallen in love with it? I have indeed fallen in love. Dong Qianling looked left and right happily. I realize that I'm at least as strong as Ling Xiaozui in a certain aspect. Xia Bingchuan thought, are you King dreaming? Do you know what you're talking about? Dong Qianling chortled happily. Xia Bingchuan scolded him for being crazy, turning his head away from this crazy fellow. However, he did not know that if this were to be converted into a martial arts skill, then Dong Qianling was indeed not bragging. This is the antidote, take it to get rid of the poison. Yun Yang handed over a green pill. This is the antidote to the blood coagulation poison. Venerable Lord Snow, Venerable Lord Frost and the rest were doubtful. It did not look like it at all. This is the antidote. How can I still joke at a time like this? Yun Yang snorted. Of course, there was no antidote to the blood coagulation poison. Otherwise, with the abilities of the Four Seasons Tower's four venerable lords, as long as they knew any antidote, why would they be restrained by Yun Yang and agree to his harsh conditions? However, Yun Yang really did have an antidote, one that could be concocted at any time. Of course, only Yun Yang could do such a thing. For others, even if Mr. Nian were to come personally, he could at most use his profound cultivation base to force the poison out of Venerable Lord Sword's body. It would be impossible for him to provide any other antidote. Even if there was no antidote in this world, Amy would be able to provide the antidote for any poison that Yun Yang created, as long as it passed through Yun Yang's hands. Under normal circumstances, poisons and antidotes were the most difficult problems to solve. However, it was not a problem for Yun Yang. At least, up until now, there had never been a poison that Amy could not cure. On the other hand, Amy's poison had an unknown upper limit of danger. At least, the four venerable lords would not be able to handle it. It was absolutely domineering. In addition, the antidote that Yun Yang provided only had the effect of detoxifying the poison. It would not be of any additional help to Venerable Lord Sword's external injuries. Yun Yang could add more elements of vitality and even regrow Venerable Lord Sword's lost body parts. All he needed was Emi to add more elements of vitality. However, Yun Yang would not do so even if he were to be beheaded. How could Yun Yang do something so foolish as to help the enemy and himself and expose his trump card? The effect of the antidote was immediate. Venerable Lord Sword had only consumed it for a short while when his complexion began to look better. The blood that had almost completely coagulated in his body began to flow again, but at the same time his lower body began to bleed profusely. Venerable Lord Snow and Venerable Lord Frost applied the medicine quickly. The medicine that they had provided was also of the finest quality. Although Venerable Lord Sword's lower body was severely injured, his life would not be in danger if it was treated in time. Snow continued to fall from the sky, and a black figure stood in the void high up in the sky. His deific consciousness covered the entire area. Looking at the bustling scene below, his expression turned ugly, his gaze filled with dissatisfaction. Chapter 369. No matter how things developed after Mr. Nian left, he did not take any action or intervene. This had always been Mr. Nian's way of doing things. He would let his subordinates do it. Only when they were given enough opportunities to be independent could they possess the ability to do so. Cultivation base was never equivalent to ability. Mr. Nian had long understood this principle. That was why he had been doing it all these years. The Four Seasons Tower had produced many talents over the years. It was definitely related to Mr. Nian's management style. However, as he watched the situation unfold, Mr. Nian could not help but feel like he had been F***ed. He could not understand it. How did things turn out this way when they were clearly in a favorable situation? Things had been going well at first. Victory was within their grasp, and the enemy was powerless to resist. That was why he had left in peace and let the four venerable lords clean up the mess. However, things had taken a turn for the worse just like that. In the end, they were held back and forced to sign an extremely unfair treaty. Mr. Nian watched on helplessly, unable to figure out what had gone wrong. Was it really just a claw of a mystical beast cub that changed the course of events so drastically that it was unrecognizable? Was this luck? Coincidence? Fate energy? Or was it something else? He was speechless. A favorable situation had inexplicably turned out to be like this. In terms of fists and martial prowess, the cultivators clearly had the upper hand. They should have the absolute right to speak. Even if they were in the enemy's capital, even if the enemy had the advantage of numbers, they were still nothing to worry about. However, they could not use martial prowess at this moment. High up in the sky, a black shadow flashed. It disappeared just like that. When it appeared again, it was already a long distance away. Mr. Nyen could not bear to watch it anymore. The situation had been lost and all that was left was frustration. However, the gloom in his heart was still indescribable. I asked you to do the job, but you were suppressed the moment you arrived. You were in a precarious situation and you could lose at any time. I had no choice but to take action personally and cripple those who could be considered my opponents. There were only a few ants left for you to clean up. In the end, you haven't even killed the person who deserves to be killed the most. Instead, you've come to bury the hatchet. Mr. Nyen was afraid that he would fall from the sky if he continued to watch. The poison has been cured. The deal is complete. 2 pairs of silver and goods. Yunyang urged, in other words, go and do what you need to do. Everyone, we're really not familiar with each other. The great Tao is facing the heavens, so let's walk our own path. It was only natural for him to chase them away. In spite of this, Yunyang was the owner of the residence. It was only logical, and appropriate for him to order his guest to leave. Venerable Lord Snow scoffed, young Master Yun, even though we are enemies, there is no need to be so anxious. My big brother is still seriously injured and needs to recuperate. It's unreasonable to ask him to leave at this time. You said to bury the hatchet, was it just a joke? Yunyang smiled faintly. If all of you can be at ease, I actually have no problem with it. However, if Venerable Lord Sword were to be poisoned again, it would have nothing to do with anyone else. At least, I won't be able to take responsibility. Venerable Lord Snow, Venerable Lord Ice, and Venerable Lord Frost were stunned. What the kid said made sense. No matter how nicely they talked about turning hostility into friendship, the knot in their hearts was still there and the hatred had yet to be resolved. The place had already turned into ruins and was full of scars. Who knew which mysterious poison was lurking in the corner? What if Venerable Lord Sword was poisoned? Through the previous instance of Venerable Lord Sword being poisoned, Venerable Lord Snow and the rest knew clearly that the poison that Yunyang possessed was extremely overbearing. Even the antidote that the Four Seasons Tower's higher-ups had prepared that could cure 100 poisons could do nothing about it. Therefore, it was better not to stay in this troublesome place. You win. We will meet again. Venerable Lord Ice said hatefully. The Four Seasons Tower has just said and sworn to mind our own business. Yunyang said, so, all of you should be looking forward to meeting again? Just as Venerable Lord Snow stood up, he suddenly recalled something. Young Master Yun, there's one more thing I'd like to ask before I leave. I hope young Master Yun would be generous enough to enlighten me. Yunyang asked, what is it? I won't be stingy with what I can tell you. In other words, he would be stingy with what he couldn't say. Venerable Lord Snow said, I don't quite understand. Where did the 4 Eclipse Panthers go? Yunyang remained calm as he replied, Eclipse Panthers? What Eclipse Panthers? Venerable Lord Snow looked at Yunyang's expression and uttered word by word, Eclipse Panthers. They are the Eclipse Panthers, the top-notch mystical beast, the Eclipse Panthers. Yunyang frowned as he pondered. Suddenly he realized something. You mean the 4 colorful little panthers? Aren't they clouded panthers? How can they be Eclipse Panthers? You said it yourself, Eclipse Panthers are top-notch mystical beasts. How can there be 4 of them appearing at the same time? Clouded panthers? Colorful. Venerable Lord Snow could not help scratching his head, obviously puzzled by Yunyang's words. He was mentally prepared for Yunyang's denial and rebuttal, but since when did the Eclipse Panthers become colorful? It was clearly pure white, okay? They are white Eclipse Panthers. The kind without a single stray hair. Venerable Lord Snow emphasized again, making it clear that there was no doubt about it and that Yunyang had to admit it. White. Then I've really never seen them before. Yunyang said apologetically, now that we've buried the hatchet, we can still be friends when we meet in the future. There's nothing that can't be said, but these 4 white panthers, I've really never seen them before. Venerable Lord Snow said faintly, young Master Yun, do you take us for fools? Venerable Lord Sword was injured and poisoned by the Eclipse Panther's claws, and you, Yunyang, have the antidote in your hands. Who else could it be if not yours? You're still denying it even now. Of course Yunyang could feel the menacing glare. After a pause, he was taken aback and said, could it be what? Venerable Lord Snow's expression changed. Yes. When young Master Lei first came, he brought a few pets with him. All of them were colorful and beautiful. They didn't seem to have grown up yet, but they were definitely not pure white, not a single bit. Venerable Lord Snow and Venerable Lord Ice exchanged a glance. Colorful panthers? That's right, leopards have colorful fur. Could it be that Lei Dongtian dyed their fur? Venerable Lord Frost said, could it be that Lei Dongtian saw the heavy snow, that's why he dyed the panthers white? Using the weather to enhance their camouflage and increase their chances of winning, he used them as assistants. That's what led to the biggest variable in this battle. Venerable Lord Snow raised his eyebrows and nodded inwardly. Where are the panthers now? Venerable Lord Snow asked. Where are the panthers? Of course I know, but I won't tell you. Yunyang was delighted, stroking the fist-sized kitten in his embrace and said, I was only concerned with escaping then, how could I have the mood to pay attention to them? You've overestimated me. Then where did you get the antidote? Brother Lei has foresight. Speaking of which, I can't help but admire Brother Lei's foresight. You've actually thought of this? Yunyang sensitively felt that he had made a mistake. However, he could only muddle through now. All of you have said to bury the hatchet. It's up to you whether you believe it or not. The three of them did not know whether they believed it or not, but they did not dwell on this issue. Tell Lei Dongtian. Venerable Lord Snow said fiercely, don't die too early. The Four Seasons Tower will definitely end this. Let's go. Venerable Lord Snow carried Venerable Lord Sword and walked out with the other two. Even though there were thousands of soldiers and horses in front of them, the three of them were not afraid at all. They walked over and with a flash, they had already reached the rooftop on the opposite side and disappeared immediately. The snow was so heavy that no one could see clearly which direction they had gone to. Gone? Old Marshal Chiu snorted coldly. In fact, he could only heave a sigh of relief in his heart. If he had a choice, Old Marshal Chiu would not be willing to go up against the Four Seasons Tower's top-notch experts. Once pushed to the extreme, countless hot-blooded men would perish and there might not even be any gains in the end. After a while, Yunyang walked out. Is everything all right now? Yes. Qiu Jianhan snorted and said, how did such a big thing happen all of a sudden? Now that it's over, tell your father everything according to what you've said. I'm actually not too sure about the details of this matter. I guess it's like when one is sitting at home, disaster comes from the sky. The Four Seasons Tower has always been domineering. Didn't they announce something about subduing the world by force and bathing the martial world in blood? They might have treated my place as one of the stops in the martial world. Now that there's nothing to worry about, what's the point of looking into the details? Yunyang's eyes darted around as he spouted nonsense with a straight face. Qiu Jianhan waved his hands impatiently and said, it's better if you don't lie. It's as easy as drinking cold water for you to make up a lie, but this old man is tired of it. This old man didn't want to hear it anyway. Men retreat. With a command, he turned his horse around and left, ignoring Yunyang completely. Lung Daoyin chuckled and nodded at Yunyang before leaving as well. Yunyang could vaguely see a slender and valiant silhouette flashing in the snow, but it was gone in the next moment. Yunyang was stunned. The person had already gone far away. However, that fleeting glimpse had given Yunyang an inexplicable feeling. You people, who asked you to come back? Yunyang's face was dark, his tone stern. Cough cough. Dong Chenling and the others chuckled dryly. We couldn't bear to part with our boss, so we planned to come back and take another look before we depart immediately without any delay. It was unknown if they were imitating Yunyang or if Yunyang had learned something from them, but Dong Qianling and the others' methods were remarkably similar to Yunyang's. They were also spouting nonsense with a straight face. Their words were at their fingertips and they spoke without thinking. It actually sounded like the same thing. However, who was Yunyang? He was an expert in spouting nonsense with a straight face. How could he be fooled? With a cold glare, the four popinjays kept quiet out of fear. Chapter 370. Qiu Yunsan saw that the atmosphere was unusually stiff, especially Yunyang's expression. He had a quick wit and said, actually, Dong Qianling forgot something here. We came with him to retrieve it, but he was too embarrassed to say it, so he used thinking of you as an excuse. Chun Wanfeng and Xia Bingchuan nodded like pecking chicks. Yes. That's what happened. Dong Qianling is full of lies. Boss, you have to beat him up. Dong Qianling looked aggrieved, but he had no choice but to comply. Yes. I forgot something and was too embarrassed to say it. Humph. Yunyang snorted. His expression was still sour, but his heart was filled with warmth. It was a warmth that he had not felt for a long time. Today, Dong Qianling and the other three had risked their lives to return, and now, Marshal Qiu and Marshal Lung had openly challenged the Four Seasons Tower. Yunyang was comforted. Despite his grumbling, he was touched and thankful. He was thankful that he had so many good friends that proved that he was still a successful person. He was also thankful that he was lucky enough to turn the tables with a few white claws. Such luck would most likely only appear in novels. How could it happen in reality? The chances were too slim. Since the few of you are back, I have some troublesome matters to deal with here. I have to clean up the house and do other things. Why don't you all stay and help? Yun Yang rolled his eyes. There's free labor, it would be a waste not to use it. Great, I'm willing to die for boss. The four noble young masters were elated. Everyone looked at each other and could not help but laugh. The laughter was hearty, their hearts filled with relief. It was a feeling that the bond between the brothers had advanced to another level. Their souls were truly close without any barriers. The situation now is completely different from what we expected. What should we do with the remaining people? Chun Wanfeng asked in a low voice. Chiu Yun-san said in surprise, You want to keep people who can't go through the same ordeal? Send my order, bring the mystical beasts back and dismiss them on the spot. Let them go on their own. Dong Qianling said, That's what I think too. How can we keep someone like that around? Isn't it a sign of soft-heartedness and indecisiveness? It's decided then. Send the message back immediately. Xia Bingchuan was decisive as well. After the waves wash away the sand, only the gold is left. Chiu Yun-san said, I have no objections. I don't even want to look at those people again, let alone keep them here. Where are we staying today? There are only 1 or 2 rooms in the residence of Yun that are barely habitable, but they can't possibly accommodate so many people. Bai Yishua scratched his head. How can anyone live in that shabby room? This young master has struck gold today, all of you will be staying in the inn. Yun Yang waved his hand. Each of you will have the best room. I'll pay. Money made things easy. In fact, in most cases, money was omnipotent. There was no need for Yun Yang to make a personal appearance. Lao Mei went out with the banknotes and found the craftsman within a quarter of an hour. In pursuit of speed, Lao Mei had found 10 teams to work overtime to rebuild the residence of Yun in this snowy day. The corresponding wages had all been tripled. Since they were all extorted money, Lao Mei had no qualms spending it. Winter was supposed to be the break period for these craftsmen, so they basically had free time. Since they could earn a lot of money this time, the group of craftsmen all eagerly came over. If Lao Mei had not recruited enough people and accepted all, they would have fought over the slots. However, there were some things that money could not solve. For example, mud could not be mixed in the winter, especially in such a snowy day that was unusually cold. It was useless even if they were forced to mix. Let's use stones directly. Yun Yang made up his mind. Let's build the entire residence of Yun with white mystical stones. Even the huts should use white mystical stones to ensure consistency and uniformity. Although the white profound stone was the lowest grade of profound stone, and 10,000 pieces wouldn't be able to absorb much profound energy, if it was used as a building material, it would definitely be the best building material in the profound sky continent. Every piece was perfectly square, and it had its own heat insulation effect, so it would be warm in winter and cool in summer. Furthermore, when the house built with this material was completed, the pressure from top to bottom would cause all the white mystical stones to solidify together, leaving no gaps to speak of. More importantly, the white mystical stone had a certain degree of amplification effect on a martial artist's cultivation. Therefore, the price of this material had always been sky-high. Very few people would actually use it to build an entire residence. Even in the palace, there were only a few pure white mystical stone houses and a few courtyards. Even then, it was already very extravagant. With Yun Yang's order, the cost of rebuilding the residence of Yun had undoubtedly soared to an astronomical figure. The cost estimate gave Lao Mei a huge shock. Young master, the initial estimate would be at least 80 million silver taels. Lao Mei's face was ashen because the 80 million taels of silver was only the cost of the materials. The cost of the labor and other materials were not included. Just the cost of the white mystical stone alone was already so much. If everything was calculated, it would be at least 100 million taels of silver. This amount was enough to empty Yutong's national treasury. Only this much? Yun Yang raised his eyebrows. Then change it all to double-layered white mystical stone. Don't forget about the secret underground chamber as well, we need to make it more secure. Use white mystical stone for the foundation as well. Lao Mei stretched his neck, his eyes wide. 200 million silver taels might not even be enough for such a construction method. Right, remember to use silver mystical stone for the roof. Yun Yang was extremely wealthy. Use Snow Mountain sandalwood for the roof beams and white crystal for the windows. Only then can we ensure the best lighting. Lao Mei was completely speechless. Based on this calculation, the most conservative estimate for rebuilding the residence of Yun would be around 300 million silver taels. Also, tell the workers that if they can rebuild the residence of Yun within half a month, their wages will be doubled on top of the current tripled. Yun Yang was determined to build the residence of Yun into the most luxurious palace in the entire Tianshan continent. He realized that he really needed a base. Especially after today's battle, he had successfully escaped from the Four Seasons Tower's line of sight. The residence of Yun had truly become the darkest place under the light. Therefore Yun Yang decided to build this place more securely. He was also thinking of expanding the underground structure to encompass the few residences beside it, and then building the underground into a spider web that extended in all directions. Whoever's house would still be the one living in it, but the underground would be connected to each other. This would undoubtedly make it easier for him to contact his subordinates, and it would also be easier for him to act in secret. After all, the residence of Yun had been destroyed, and the Four Seasons Tower was considered to be very clear about the residence of Yun's underground. There was absolutely nothing special. Then, after they were clear about it, the underground would be completely remodeled. Lao Mei, who was shocked by the astronomical figure, went to execute the construction order. Yun Yang, on the other hand, brought his men and booked the entire tower to Heaven Inn. Only the largest and most luxurious inn in Tiantang City could have so many high-class guest rooms. Then Yun Yang went to Qiu Jinhan's residence. He still had to talk to the old man in detail. Otherwise, if old Marshal Qiu were to be petty, he would really have to bear the consequences. How could the title of the leader of the capital city's three rogues be false? Then a certain someone came out with a head full of goosebumps from old man Qiu's scolding, still grimacing in pain, but there was only one sentence in his mind: Dongshin was going to mobilize its army again. The empire's eastern defense was going to face another harsh test. The reason the empire of Dongshin had chosen to go to war in such a frigid weather was mainly because Han Sanhe's faction was currently at a disadvantage. Countless officials had accused Han Sanhe with a myriad of reasons. Furthermore, the attack this time had come abruptly and without warning. Han Sanhe was caught off guard, and even many of his former allies had jumped out to criticize him at this juncture. How could he explain himself if the entire imperial court was his enemy? Even Han Sanhe, who was experienced and ruthless, was in a difficult position. However, it was because of this that Han Sanhe had decided to use a great victory to quell the storm in the imperial court, to shut the mouths of those who had spoken. The only target of the attack was the empire of Yutong. Yun Yang's heart was as clear as a mirror about this. What kind of abrupt and unforeseen attack was this? It's obviously you who've touched the Four Seasons Tower's reverse scale, thus incurring the revenge. Who asked you to send Bai Yixue to assassinate He Hanqing for no reason? Serves you right. Those who stand up to attack you now are most likely instructed by the Four Seasons Tower, or perhaps they were instructed by the tower. No matter what, Han Sanhe's sudden attack was not a good thing for Yutong. Perhaps, it was an extremely disadvantageous war. Recently, two of Yutong's famous generals had met with mishaps. First, it was Yutong's northern troops Marshal Yang Buotao, who had been put on trial and lost his reputation, falling overnight. Then there was old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian's chosen successor, Fu Baogua, who had met with an accident, causing an unprecedented upheaval in Yutong's military. Although Tai Zheng had taken over as the northern troops marshal and Fu Baogua had stepped into the battlefield again to guard the eastern border, cautiously guarding against Dongshuan's possible invasion at any time, the upheaval had subsided, but the risk was still difficult to eliminate. How could Yun Yang not be worried? Just as Yun Yang was thinking about how he should deal with this matter, he unexpectedly heard the old marshal muttering to himself, "The craziest assassin in the continent has finally been caught in Ziyou in a year." Yun Yang did not think much of it at first, even asking curiously, "What craziest assassin?" Qiu Jianhan snorted and glared at him, saying, "This has nothing to do with you. Focus on repairing your residence of Yun, lest your father beats you up when he comes back." Still, after some thought, he explained, "A mysterious assassin has appeared in the continent for almost a year, targeting the high officials of the Four Empires specifically. He has never offended Yutong's people. In this year, the number of high officials and generals who have died in the hands of this assassin has reached as many as 70-80 generals. They've fallen into desperate situations many times, but this assassin's cultivation base is truly formidable, always managing to break out of the encirclement and find a way out of death. It's a pity that the more you climb, the more you meet the tiger." He was caught on the spot when he was trying to assassinate the empire of Ziyou's military marshal, Zi Yuanlong. In the end, Qiu Jianhan said regretfully, "This assassin only targets the officials of the four empires. He's most likely a loyal soldier of Yutong. It's such a pity that he's dead just like that." Chapter 371. Yun Yang left the residence of Qiu with a tinge of regret in his heart. Just like what old Marshal Qiu had said, it was indeed a pity for such a top-notch assassin to die. However, no matter how much of a pity he felt, he was now trapped in the empire of Ziyou and beyond Yun Yang's reach. Even if he had the intention to save him or even take action, the assassin might have already died by the time he arrived. Furthermore, he was unable to free himself now. Lei Dongtian, Sister Lan, and Lingxi alone would require a lot of time to deal with. Humans would always have a sense of closeness and distance. Yun Yang was a human as well, he was no exception. Those who were too virtuous and could put others before themselves, taking care of others before caring for their own, were not humans but saints. Therefore, when he contacted Shui Wuyin, Yun Yang casually instructed, "Right, Wuyin, get someone to investigate the assassin captured in Ziyou. If he's really a righteous man from our side, see if you can help him. At the very least, help to protect his family. Or find a chance to give him a quick death so that he doesn't have to suffer humiliation and die with regret." Shui Wuyin agreed and did not take this matter to heart. "Young master, the Ziyou assassin is not a difficult matter. Instead, it's another matter that is difficult to deal with." "What is it? How can it trouble you?" "It's all because of those two young ladies." Shui Wuyin's expression was as bitter as a gourd. "They're going crazy now. I went to comfort them but I've been beaten up 3 times. If this goes on, I'll go crazy too." Yun Yang patted his head, feeling rather troubled by this matter as well. Yun Yang's previous plan was too bad. His most ideal idea was to retreat unscathed, at most not exposing his identity as one of the 9 Supremes. How could he have imagined that the situation would take such a turn? Now that the matter had passed, the terrible situation that he had envisioned was no longer there. He had to bring Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan back, but the more specific problem was how to explain it after he brought them back. How could he let the 2 ladies vent their anger? He had knocked them out and sent them away. It would be a wonder if they would forgive him when they came back. "Sai, this matter is a little difficult. I think I'll have to trouble you to stay there for a few more days. Tell them that I'm fine here, but the house in the residence of Yun has been completely destroyed. It needs to be rebuilt. Once it's done, I'll bring them home immediately." The only solution Yun Yang could think of now was to not meet face to face and let Shui Wuyin be the scapegoat. After all, Shui Wuyin was closer to 8th brother. His fiancée and his younger sister would be handled by Shui Wuyin. It was only logical that they would be a perfect match. Anyway, it's all in the past now. After a few days, when their anger subsides, we can go and pick them up. It'll be fine. Yun Yang thought to himself. Poor young Master Yun, the young Lord Supreme Cloud, who claimed to know everything in the world, did not understand women at all. Women were really strange creatures. No matter what it was, as long as you explained it right after it happened, everything would be fine after a fit of anger, no matter how serious it was. However, you did not explain it right away but chose to keep it under wraps for a period of time. Then, any matter, even if it was the size of a needle tip, could become a tragic accident that could cause the earth to collapse and the mountains to collapse. Obviously, Yun Yang had not realized it yet. Author's note, I've realized it. That time it was unbearable to recall. The earth had almost collapsed and the mountains to collapse. Therefore, when it was time to pay the price, it was reasonable, within reason, within expectation, and not surprising at all. Lord Supreme Cloud's ravaging should not be able to escape. Back in the room at the Tower to Heaven Inn. Young Master Lei has woken up, Bai Yixue came to report. Alright, I'll go take a look. Brother Yun. Lei Dongtian's eyes reddened the moment he saw Yun Yang. Alright, it's alright now. Yun Yang sat down with a heavy heart. Brother Lei, I'm very sorry. Old Mu is dead. I know, it's good that you're alright. Lei Dongtian's eyes were rimmed red. The heavens have taken pity on us, both of us are still alive. Lei Dongtian had yet to recover from his severe injuries. Having escaped death, he was easily emotional. Indeed, the heavens have blessed us. As weak as I am, I've set up special poisons in a few places in the residence of Yun just in case, betting that the other party would destroy the residence of Yun. It's probably because Brother Lei caused them to lose their composure when they were in a dangerous situation. They were eager to vent their anger and targeted the residence of Yun. In the end, it was Venerable Lord Sword who was poisoned. The other party didn't have the antidote, so they had no choice but to compromise. It's just that using such a despicable method to survive, it's really shameful. Yun Yang sighed and said with disappointment, Brother Lei, the Four Seasons Tower is really a behemoth. Its reputation is not just for show. I've told you before that the Four Seasons Tower has many capable people, especially the head of the Four Seasons Tower, Mr. Nian. He's a pinnacle expert who can compete with the unrivaled expert Ling Xiaozue. Even if you didn't intentionally avoid it, it'd be best if you went back to your family and brought more people with you. However, you didn't listen. Lei Dongtian lowered his head. It's really my fault this time. It's really too dangerous this time. Yun Yang sighed deeply. Although I was lucky enough to force them to retreat with poison, they've also raised conditions. The situation is stronger than the person, I have no choice but to comply. What conditions? Lei Dongtian asked. The condition is for me to draw a clear line between you and me. They said it very clearly that their goal is only to deal with you and not me. Yun Yang said. While the hatred in Lei Dongtian's eyes grew stronger, there was also doubt. What? I have to talk about one of my protective treasures. Yun Yang was silent for a moment. Jun Moyan's medallion of gratitude, the only one left in this world, is with me. Lei Dongtian had obviously heard of Jun Moyan's name. He said in a low voice, I see. Did you agree to it? Yun Yang was displeased. Brother Lei, what kind of person do you think I am? If I had agreed to it, how could Brother Lei still be alive now? Lei Dongtian hurriedly apologized. Brother Yun, it was a slip of the tongue just now. How could I not know that you are righteous? This foolish brother here apologizes solemnly. Yun Yang said, Of course I wouldn't agree to such conditions, but the situation was too critical at that time. I had to compromise. Other than giving them the antidote to Venerable Lord Sword's poison, I also promised them that I won't be involved in your fight in the future. In return, they are not allowed to step into my residence of Yun no matter when. Lei Dongtian's gaze flickered, obviously hearing the huge difference between the two. This also means that if you're at a disadvantage when you fight in the future, you can come to my residence of Yun for shelter. Yun Yang said apologetically, This is already the best result I can fight for. Lei Dongtian took a deep breath. I understand now. It's already commendable to have such an outcome. Sai, I wanted to persuade them to return your fiancé and bury the hatchet. I even promised them to be your lobbyist, to make the decision on your behalf and not pursue the matter of old Mu's death or even injuring you, but the Four Seasons Tower refused to agree. Yun Yang looked around and said in a low voice, Brother Lei, I suspect that the Four Seasons Tower seems to have a great intention on you. I used Venerable Lord Sword's life as a threat, so there was a lot of leeway. However, I could faintly feel that if I continued to insist, the other party would very likely choose to give up on Venerable Lord Sword and would no longer compromise. Since things can't be done, we can only reach an understanding with the most favorable conditions now. Lei Dongtian chuckled. This is inevitable. They will never agree to it. The benefits I have are too great. In fact, it's already beyond my expectations that they're willing to let me go for now. Brother Lei, rest well here with me. We'll talk about everything after you've recovered. Yun Yang stood up. The residence of Yun is being rebuilt now. When it's done, we'll move back. Lei Dongtian nodded silently. He thought to himself, move back? How can I have the face to move back? The fall of the residence of Yun is all because of me. Since the enemy's capability is so great, I have to take action. After a few days, when I can move freely again, I'll return to the family immediately and ask for reinforcements before coming back for revenge. No matter what, the Four Seasons Tower must be uprooted. If I don't take revenge, I'm not human. However, Brother Yun's deep friendship and life-saving grace must be repaid no matter what. For me, he has even destroyed the foundation of his ancestors. No matter what, I must repay him. Such a good brother has saved my life again. If I were to sacrifice him as a cauldron in the future, the effect would be unexpectedly ideal. On the other side, Venerable Lord Sword and the rest had already gone to the outskirts of Tiantang City. They dug out a cave under a mountain to temporarily avoid the wind and snow and recuperate. With their cultivation base, they could naturally ignore the wind and snow. Of course, Venerable Lord Sword, who was still severely injured, was not included. He would need at least 3 days of rest before he could move. However, it was an undeniable fact that Venerable Lord Sword's cultivation base had been greatly damaged after such a heavy injury. I'm still confused after this fight. Venerable Lord Ice scratched his head and said, Why did we fight? Why did they kill OL Fifth? Venerable Lord Snow said coldly, The cause was probably a misunderstanding. After OL Fifth died, the so-called misunderstanding was no longer important. It seems like Lei Dongtian didn't say anything about the cause this time. He only asked us from the beginning, where is he? Where are they? Venerable Lord Ice asked, have we captured his men? Venerable Lord Frost snorted and said, since things have come to this, what's the point of asking about it? Is this the current priority? Beside him, a voice filled with misery and hatred rang out, that's right. Since things have come to this, there's really no need to pursue the cause or the beginning. This hatred is irreconcilable, it won't rest until one of us dies. Why don't we update in the afternoon or at night? Chapter 372. It was Venerable Lord Sword who had woken up. As soon as he did so, he swore a death oath. Venerable Lord Snow frowned and said, this vengeance cannot be forgiven, but the source of this matter involves the remnants of the 9 Supremes. There's a high chance that it was done by Supreme Wind. There's still something fishy going on. Everything will be clear when we capture Lei Dongtian. Venerable Lord Frost gritted his teeth. Today is really, he wanted to say that he was really aggrieved. However, remembering that Venerable Lord Sword, the source of his frustration, was right beside him, he refrained from saying it out loud. Where are our people? Venerable Lord Snow asked. We've been fighting for so long. Why aren't they here yet? Human. A cold voice came from outside. You still have the face to ask? Your people. If you weren't in such a hurry and waited for everyone to arrive before taking action, you wouldn't have created such a shameful matter. Master. Frost and Snow immediately stood up. Even Venerable Lord Sword, who was lying on the ground, wore a respectful expression. The person outside didn't come in. Only a leisurely voice could be heard, I won't interfere in this matter anymore. Since you have made an alliance with them, you must abide by it. If you need help, go to the Hall of Worship. However, if there are any slip-ups, you will be responsible for all the consequences. The faces of the 4 people inside were full of shame. Venerable Lord Snow said, my lord, what happened to Lei Dongtian is enough to show how powerful his family is. If their family's experts come, I'm afraid we... There was no sound from outside. It seemed to be considering. After a long time, 4 small jade bottles slowly flew in. This is a cultivation-breaking pill. A leisurely voice came from outside, with your cultivation level, you are still 1 step away from being able to consume it. If you consume it now, I'm afraid it will damage your godhood in the future. However, since you're determined to take revenge, I'll give it to you first. You decide for yourselves what to do. After saying this, there was no more sound from outside. This time Mr. Nyen had really left. The 4 venerable ones were extremely ashamed. It was extremely shameful to do something that should have been in the bag to this extent. It was a matter of ability, luck, and character. Could they blame Mr. Nyen for criticizing them? I don't have the right to say that I blame him. Looking at the limit-breaking elixir on the ground, Venerable Lord Snow heaved a long sigh. It was as if the limit-breaking pellet, which he had always dreamed of, didn't have much allure at this moment. Let's get down to business first. His lord is very disappointed with us now, and we need to do something about it. Forget it. Let's adjust our mentality and face reality. On the surface, we have already retreated from Tiantang City. Be it us or the other party, we all knew that this was a situation where we had no choice but to compromise. Compared to us who had the upper hand in terms of strength, we were in a foreign land while the eldest and the 4th were heavily injured. We had to endure many unnecessary dangers if we were to stay in Tiantang City. Why don't we temporarily settle down here and leave 1 person to look after boss while the other 2 go back and act in secret? Venerable Lord Snow said, my idea is that Bing will stay to look after boss while Shuang and I will return to Tiantang City and gather our manpower. Then we will send 2 people to take care of you and let you recuperate in peace. Although the residence of Heavenly Clouds has been destroyed, I think Yunyang will definitely rebuild it since both parties have reached an understanding. However, it will take some time. Therefore, they will still find another place to settle down in a short period of time. This is something we can use. Also, it's the key point for now. Lei Dongtian's strength is amazing and he has servants of the same level accompanying him. It's impossible for him to appear out of nowhere without a background. We can't attack the residents of Yun and kill him due to our agreement with Yunyang, but we can use this to our advantage and make him lower his guard. When he leaves, we can track him secretly. We can catch him all at once or even eliminate his roots and annihilate his family. This will solve the problem once and for all. Otherwise, there will always be trouble in the future. If that's the case, this attack isn't completely bad, but it's not completely bad. Know yourself and know your enemy, only then can you emerge victorious. A victory without any hidden dangers is the true meaning of victory. In addition, considering Lei Dongtian's strength, I believe that the family or sect he comes from must be extraordinary and extremely powerful. Based on the strength of Lei Dongtian alone, I believe that the family or sect he comes from must be extraordinary and extremely powerful. In order to be safe, the Hall of Worship is also a must. Of course, all of this has to be confirmed before we seek help from the Hall of Worship. If there's a mistake, not only will it be embarrassing, but it will also be a waste of manpower and resources. Therefore, we need to fully understand Lei Dongtian's background before informing his lordship and the Hall of Worship. We can't act rashly anymore. It's already too many times that we've failed once. We can't afford a second time. Otherwise, you and I will really have no face to face his lordship. Venerable Lord I said, second brother, has his lordship really left? Venerable Lord Snow smiled faintly. Who can guess his lordship's thoughts? Since we can't figure it out, there's no need to guess anymore. It's a waste of effort. Having been with Mr. Nian for so many years, how could Venerable Lord Snow not understand this? Moreover, if they had messed things up in the past and had to compromise to this extent, it would definitely attract a thunderous rage or even a more severe punishment. This time, although Mr. Nian was still upset, he did not say much and even took the initiative to give the Hall of Worship the right to allocate. He even gave them the limit-breaking pill. This was a treatment that they would never have enjoyed in the past. This had already proven that his lordship had other intentions. Just this point alone was enough for them to ponder over. If they could complete his lordship's secret intentions, then it would be considered a complete achievement. Right, there's one more thing that's equally important. Since his lordship allowed us to use the Hall of Worship, it also indirectly shows that the strength behind Lei Dongtian is not easy to deal with. No, in fact, Lei Dongtian's strength is already extremely terrifying, especially his strange hand seal. Now that I think about it, it's still terrifying. Venerable Lord Snow said solemnly, so when we meet him again, we must use our killing move from the beginning. Start the battle with the territory. Venerable Lord Frost nodded faintly. That brat's ability is above ours, but as long as we activate the Frost and Snow Alliance and combine our territories, we can easily suppress him. Venerable Lord Snow dared not let his guard down. He discussed the battle strategy with Venerable Lord Frost for a long time while Venerable Lord Sword and Venerable Lord Ice came up with ideas from the side. Speaking of this loss, the four of them did not take it to heart. Losing in the martial world was a common occurrence. As long as the person was still alive and the cultivation base was still there, they could recover at any time. It was not a big deal. What really weighed on their minds was Venerable Lord Sword's injury. This was not an ordinary injury that could be easily healed. The brothers did not say it out loud, but they were secretly worried. Venerable Lord Sword, who was directly involved, was naturally worried, but he did not show it on his face. Only his gaze grew darker. The limit-breaking pill? Venerable Lord Frost hesitated. Keep it first, Venerable Lord Snow said. If things go south, it's not too late to use the territory to escape and consume the pill. Alright. On the other side, Yun Yang, who was good at singing and dancing, left the inn alone after comforting Lei Dongtian, heading towards the residence of 9 Supremes. The residence of 9 Supremes. Yun Yang had not been to the residence of 9 Supremes for some time. Firstly, he did not want to arouse the attention of others, and secondly, he did not want to be reminded of the past. Yun Yang was actually aware of his own state of mind. The sorrow of his brothers had always lingered in his heart. If he could avoid it, it would be best to do so. However, he had no choice but to go to the residence of 9 Supremes today. During this period of time, Yun Yang had cultivated the 5 cultivation methods of thunder, cloud, wind, fire, and blood. His progress was rather rapid, even faster than when his elder brothers were cultivating back then. Somehow, when Yun Yang wanted to cultivate the 6th cultivation method, which was his 4th brother's holy water charm, he could not even break through the first stage of the introductory cultivation method. This was obviously not a matter of talent. In fact, ever since Yun Yang had received the Kirin fish's gift, his meridians had surpassed the common definition of a water genius. Among the various cultivation methods of the 9 Supremes, including the cloud cultivation method that Yun Yang had originally cultivated, none of them were as compatible as the holy water charm. However, no matter how hard he tried, the cultivation method that should be the most compatible and the fastest for advancement could not be initiated. It was only when Yun Yang, with Lei Dongtian's help, had transformed the 100 years of cultivation base that the cinnabar fruit had given him into his own, and his deific consciousness had increased by a few times that he finally had a breakthrough and mastered the first stage of the holy water charm. When he was cultivating previously, he had cultivated all the wind, fire, thunder and blood in one go, but he did not feel anything. He only knew that time was of the essence. Cultivating the various cultivation methods as soon as possible would help him in his plans. However, the mastery of the first stage of the holy water charm this time had given Yunyang a strong sense of need. It was as if the water attribute in his body could no longer be held back once it had been stimulated and was about to burst forth, urging Yunyang to quickly cultivate the following cultivation methods. Yunyang was surprised by this and did not understand why. This feeling was especially strong after the battle with Venerable Lord Ice. It was hard to suppress. If not, how would Yunyang be willing to step into the residence of 9 Supremes again? As long as he was in this place, he would feel that he had not done his job well and would feel ashamed to face his brothers. Sometimes I wonder if all of you will really not come back after I have mastered all of them? If so, I'd rather destroy my cultivation method and not leave any mystical chi or cultivation base. Standing in the familiar thick fog of the residence of 9 Supremes, Yunyang faced Supreme Water's door and asked softly, "Are all of you waiting for this day to come?" Yunyang mumbled to himself softly. The door was silent. "Actually, all of you did this on purpose. You all hid far away on purpose so that I could learn all of the 9 cultivation methods? Am I right?" Yunyang snorted and said, "I know that all of you are actually not dead. You're all watching me from afar." The door was still silent. "All the corpses on the battlefield are in pieces. I've searched for a long time but I can't find your heads." Yunyang's eyes were rimmed red as he forced himself to control himself. He tried his best to analyze the situation in a positive light, fooling himself. "I've searched for a long time, flipping through all the minced flesh and bones, but I can only find Boss' hand. He doesn't have a hand. At most he'll be crippled, he won't die. Where are all of you? All of you are still alive, right?" After muttering to himself, Yunyang suddenly plopped down on the ground without a care for his image. He hugged his head tightly and buried it between his legs, silent tears falling uncontrollably. He took in deep breaths, forcing himself to calm down, but he could not stop his body from trembling violently. Here, the supreme cloud outside who could turn the world upside down, who could behead powerful enemies amidst laughter, was no longer there. All his composure, all his composure, all his composure, all his elegance had disappeared. Right now Yunyang was just a lonely child who had been abandoned by a large group. At this moment Yunyang was filled with an indescribable loneliness and desolation. "I finally have Sister Yu to talk to and you've taken her away again. You're too cruel. Are you going to take Sister Lan and Lingxi with you later? Why didn't you take me with you? Leaving me alone in this world?" Yunyang complained, choking back his sobs. The residence of 9 Supremes was as misty as before. The thick fog floated around. In the silence, there seemed to be a few pairs of eyes watching from the other end. Sigh. Yunyang's emotions were unprecedentedly turbulent. He stood up with a pout and wiped his tears. "Every time I come here I can't help but complain. Luckily there's no outsider here. It'd be so embarrassing if someone saw us. I'm Supreme Cloud, the 9 Supremes' brains." Yunyang chuckled self-deprecatingly. Without hesitation, Yunyang cultivated the holy water charm and placed his palm on Supreme Water's door. There was a click. The door opened a crack. Inside it was still the same small, private space. There was an additional bookshelf in Supreme Water's room compared to the others. Beside the bookshelf, there was a small wooden figurine. Fourth brother's hobby is really unique. Looking at the wooden figure, Yunyang could not help feeling like he was about to burst into laughter despite his heavy heart. The wooden figurine was carved in an abstract manner, resembling the eldest Supreme Earth's image. It was just that it was in a state of extreme ugliness, looking extremely comical. Supreme Water's will was left at the most obvious spot in the center of the table. There was a jade slit under the will, the item that contained all the subsequent cultivation methods of the holy water charm. Under the jade slit, there was an arcane tome, probably the introductory cultivation method of his third brother Supreme Wood's sacred wood charm. Compared to the other brothers' rooms, Supreme Water's room was exceptionally clean and tidy. It was so clean and tidy that Yunyang was surprised. A place like the residence of 9 Supremes would not have any dust at all. Even though so much time had passed, the table was still clean and shiny. There was not even a handprint on the table. Yunyang did not look at the will first but chose to look at other places first, like the bookshelf. Yun Yang, who was in the room, had only been there for a short while when he caught a whiff of a faint fragrance. It was faint, but it was real. The feeling made Yun Yang involuntarily suck in a long breath. No wonder the brothers say that fourth brother is eccentric. He's not pretentious in his actions, but he's never straightforward enough. When he's with everyone, he rarely plays around, only eldest brother is closer. I didn't expect the decorations in his room to be so different. He even sprays perfume. However, the more he looked at the bookshelf, the stranger Yun Yang's gaze became. Most of the books on the shelves were medical books. At first glance they looked ordinary. At most they covered a wide range of topics. However, if one were to look at the contents of the books carefully, one would realize that most of the medical topics in these medical books were related to women. Could it be? Yun Yang's eyes widened. Supreme Water's will had finally been picked up by him. As far as the eye could see, Supreme Water's handwriting was all over the will. It was a neat and tidy plum blossom script. It could be seen that Supreme Water had written this will very seriously. The other brothers would write a piece of paper and finish it in a few words, but Supreme Water's will had 5 whole pages, each filled to the brim. No matter which brother you are, when you read this letter, I'm sure I won't be in this world anymore. All of us brothers are good people, but there is only one person who I want to see my will the most. I hope this person is OL Ninth. Yun Yang's heart skipped a beat. OL Ninth is meticulous and meticulous. He's the most cautious and resilient among us brothers. I'll only be at ease if I entrust my funeral to OL Ninth. However, it's nothing if the other brothers see it. All of you are the ones I'm most at ease with. Yun Yang rubbed his nose, a bitter smile on his face. Supreme Water had used 2 words here. Assured. Assured. Entrusting it to Yun Yang was the most reassuring. Entrusting it to other brothers was the most reassuring. This was obviously different. Was there a difference in treatment? Yun Yang suddenly felt an inexplicable emotion. If the one who had opened the will today was not him but another brother, would that elder brother have taught him a lesson? How am I not as good as OL Ninth? How can he be at ease if I give it to him? Once he thought of this, a wave of resentment rose within him. If that was the case, what was there to be afraid of? Even if he were to be punished 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times or 10,000 times, he would still be willing. My name is Shui Bingqing. Supreme Water's will was clearly written. I believe you'll understand after reading this. Yes, I'm a girl. Yun Yang was truly bewildered this time. A girl. Fourth brother Supreme Water was actually a girl. Fourth brother was actually fourth sister. This was a huge secret that Yun Yang would never have thought of even if he cracked his head. After all, in Yun Yang's knowledge, fourth brother Supreme Water's usual image was that of a brash man who spoke rudely and did things cleanly. His mannerisms were slightly pretentious, but he still looked like a rough man. He was a little short, but he looked strong enough. None of the above characteristics had anything to do with being a woman. However, once he knew the key point, Yun Yang could not help but recall the many strange things that happened when the brothers interacted in the past. Indeed, there were times when Supreme Water's physique seemed to be slightly different. Sometimes he was thinner, sometimes he was thicker. Now that he thought about it, he must have used some method to conceal his identity with his physique. In other words, fourth brother, fourth sister did not show her true face to the brothers. I was born with the soul of Water Meridian and have been weak and sickly since I was young. Those with the soul of Water Meridian rarely don't live past 30 years old. I'm already 27 now. This is my fate. Although I'm unwilling, I have no regrets. I met my master by chance when I was 8, and it was the first turning point of my life. It was the art of water dream that my master taught me that allowed me to extend my life and enter the path of Tao. Although the cultivation method I first cultivated couldn't eliminate the hidden danger of the soul of Water Meridian, it kept my body healthy. Becoming one of the 9 Supremes at the age of 21 was the second turning point of my life. After cultivating the holy water charm, the soul of Water Meridian that I was born with was a blessing in disguise. My cultivation of the water manifestation improved tremendously, and I no longer had to worry about my life. However, somehow, I have a premonition that even if I manage to avoid the death of the soul of Water Meridian, I still won't be able to pass the age of 30. I don't know when the future will end, but for someone like me who should have died but luckily survived, I've already gained too much. Even though I have no regrets, I still have worries in my heart. Other than us brothers, there are still 2 more people. One is my husband, the other is my son. Yun Yang, who read up to this point, was moved. Husband. Son. Supreme Water actually had a husband and a son. Why have I never discovered such a huge secret? Too shocking. Fourth sister, you've hidden it well. This young brother is impressed. I wonder what kind of coward fourth sister has been taken away by this water lotus. When I see him in the future, I'll make things difficult for him first. Yun Yang scratched his head, suddenly feeling resentful that his sister had been taken away by some man. If I'm already gone by then, I'm sure my husband will go with me. My husband is our eldest. Supreme Earth. Reading up to this point, Yun Yang's scalp tingled. The many doubts that had been lingering in his mind were resolved at once, vanishing without a trace. The abnormal signs. My identity was no secret to eldest when I was chosen as one of the 9 Supremes. In the 2 years that followed, we slowly got to know each other, fell in love with each other, and even got together in secret 3 years ago. Although this fate couldn't be revealed in front of others or even let the brothers know about it, it was already a great fate to be able to be with each other day and night. There's only satisfaction and joy in my heart. However, I've kept it a secret from the brothers. The regret and guilt in my heart have lingered for a long time. Therefore, I've buried 900 pots of wedding wine under the old house. I hope that one day I'll be honest with my brothers and drink to our heart's content. I know his identity. He's the Prince of Yutong, but this identity doesn't hold any grudges against me. To me, he's only my husband. In this lifetime, other than being one of the 9 Supremes, he's only my husband. That's all. That's why I say that I'm really blessed, more blessed than most of the women in this world. These few years since joining the 9 Supremes have been the happiest time of my life. Even when I'm writing a will like this now, I'm writing it happily. To the brother who's reading this will of mine, I have a request here. It's also my last wish in this lifetime. He's only a year old this year, my son. I hope that you can take good care of him for me and raise him as your own son. In this life, the person I've let down the most is my son. As a descendant of royalty, he can't enjoy any of the privileges of royalty. As a child with parents, he can't receive even the slightest bit of care from them. As a descendant of the 9 Supremes, he can never show himself in front of others. Chapter 373. It was not until he left Tiantang City and sprinted thousands of miles amidst the heavy snow that he entered the mountains and stepped into the child's current location. As far as the eye could see, the place was surrounded by mountains. It was a beautiful and quiet village. There were only 40 to 50 households in the entire village. Smoke rose from the roofs that were covered in snow in the evening, making the entire village look like a landscape painting, full of peace and harmony. Yun Yang swept down like a gust of wind. The landing point was an exceptionally tranquil little courtyard, right in the middle of the entire village. Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath. This seemingly ordinary little village had a total of 49 households. However, it was not difficult for those with discerning eyes to notice that the other 48 households had formed an unusually tight defensive formation, surrounding and protecting the small courtyard in the middle in a seamless manner. Along the way, Yun Yang was acutely aware that there were at least 20 divine senses scanning him, but they did not take any further action. Along the way he passed by 7 courtyards. In each courtyard, there was a strong man staring at him with a dangerous expression. There was also a woman doing needlework at the doorway. Her pretty eyes seemed to sweep over him intentionally or unintentionally. The door of his target's yard was tightly shut. Just as Yun Yang was about to knock on the door, he heard a creak. The doors of the 2 households beside him opened at the same time, and 2 strong men walked out slowly. Their faces were guarded. "Young master, may I ask what business you have here?" Every single person in the village had a valiant aura around them. Yun Yang could easily smell the scent of blood that came from stepping foot on the battlefield from them. He looked in the direction of the voice and saw 2 burly men walking out. One of them had an empty left sleeve, and the other seemed to be limping a little, but it was not very obvious. Yun Yang smiled warmly. "May I know from which military camp did the 2 of you come from?" The 2 men looked at him warily and said, "We don't quite understand what young master means. We brothers are only hunters in the mountains. When did he ever join the army or become a soldier?" Yun Yang smiled. "Have you not? Looks like I've misunderstood. I'm here to visit my nephew." "Your nephew?" The 2 men frowned and asked in astonishment. "My nephew's nickname is Bauer. Do the 2 of you know?" Yun Yang asked. "Bauer?" The 2 men were even more vigilant as they asked sternly, "Who are you?" Yun Yang sighed and took out a jade pendant with a flick of his wrist. He had better show them the token quickly. If he did not reveal his identity now, the 2 men would probably attack him. It would be bad if someone was hurt. It would be fine if he was hurt, but what if the 2 men were hurt? These were good men who were extremely loyal and had given their all to protect their eldest brother's child. Yun Yang would feel the pinch even if he lost a strand of hair. The two men took the jade pendant and looked at it. Suddenly they heaved a sigh of relief. So it's one of us. Don't blame us. Yun-yang kept the jade pendant and said with a smile, ignorance is not a crime. All of you are concerned about my nephew's safety, so how can it be strange? I wonder where Bauer is now. Yun-yang kept the jade pendant and said with a smile, ignorance is not a crime. All of you are concerned about my nephew's safety. How is it strange? I wonder where Bauer is now. Calculating the time, Supreme Water had written his will a year and a half ago. Now Bauer should be 2.5 years old, able to run, walk and build his foundation. Bauer is at home. He's very obedient. The two burly men couldn't help but smile dotingly. This year Bauer's strength has increased a lot, and she's also smarter. As they spoke, one of the men ran over and knocked on the door. Nanny Lee, open the door quickly. We have an important guest. A woman's gentle voice said in surprise, is Bauer's mother here? Hurried footsteps could be heard. Then the door was opened. A scrawny yet charming woman in her 30s appeared in front of him with a joyful expression. She craned her neck to look around. Thinking that the person she was looking for would probably never come, Yun-yang felt a pang in his heart. He spoke telepathically, is this big sister Lianqiu? The woman was taken aback but she smiled immediately. So this young master is an important guest. Please come in. Yun-yang's words were spoken through telepathy. Everything was done for the sake of safety. In this world, there were only two people who knew this woman's real name. Supreme Earth and Supreme Water. Therefore, how could the lady not know that her own people had really come after hearing Yun-yang's words? Moreover, he was the kind of person that Supreme Earth and Supreme Water could absolutely trust. Bauer, come out quickly. A handsome uncle is here. Lianqiu chuckled. The thick curtain of the door was lifted and a little head that looked like it had been carved from jade poked out. His round eyes looked at Yun-yang as he asked shyly, Mother didn't come? Disappointment that could not be concealed flashed in his dark eyes. He put down the curtain unhappily but felt that it was a little rude, so he lifted the curtain again and said, Good day, guest. Only then did he shrink his head back. Yun-yang had fallen in love with this obedient, adorable and sensible child at first glance. He was pretty, clean, adorable, well-behaved, shy and polite. The only thing lacking about him was that he was a little too skinny. This child yearns for his mother to come every day. Every time his mother comes, it's like he can't get enough of her kisses, Lianqiu said tenderly. Yun-yang felt a pang in his heart, but he smiled and said, It's the nature of a mother and son. It's only natural for a child to do so. Lianqiu looked at his expression and asked hesitantly, The child's mother has never brought outsiders here before. What I mean is, why didn't the child's father and mother come this time? Yun-yang sucked in a deep breath and said, They went to a faraway place to carry out a mission. I'm afraid, they'll only be back after quite some time. Lianqiu frowned and said quietly, I see. They're always so busy. After a pause, she asked again, May I ask young master's surname? Yun-yang pondered for a moment and said tentatively, My surname is Feng, which means favorable weather. Lianqiu's eyes shone as she said, The surname Feng is rare indeed. I remember the child's father once said that he had a brother with the same surname. Yun-yang smiled and said, That would be me. Among Big Brother's brothers, only I have the surname Feng. Lianqiu's remaining wariness vanished as she invited Yun-yang to take a seat in the house warmly. Big Brother Nyo, Big Brother He, if you have the time, why don't you hunt some wild game for me? I'll prepare a few dishes to entertain our esteemed guests tonight, Lianqiu said as she turned around. The two burly men laughed. Is there even a need to ask? We'll go with a dozen of us later and hunt more wild game. They turned around and left, guffawing. Yun-yang looked at the retreating silhouettes of the two men, his thoughts wandering subconsciously. It seemed that Big Brother and fourth sister had not told them his real identity. Even Lianqiu did not know that the child's parents were actually two of the 9 Supremes. If he had told them, they would have known who the person in front of them was when he said that his surname was Feng. Just as he entered the house, he felt a gust of warm air blowing against him. Bauer snuggled into Lianqiu's embrace shyly and said, Uncle, who are you? Where are my papa and mama? Why didn't they come? Bauer misses them so much. In his small hand was a thin but exquisite wooden sword. Yun-yang looked at the carving marks and knew that it was Supreme Water's handwriting. The material was the same as the wooden statue he had seen earlier. Yun-yang chuckled softly and asked, Bauer misses papa and mama? Bauer nodded vigorously. Yes. Yun-yang smiled. How much? Bauer rolled his eyes and said, I even dreamt of Mama last night. It's so warm in Mama's embrace, warmer than the stove. Yunyang was close to tears as he said, Baoer's papa and Mama have gone to a faraway place. They'll only be back after a very, very long time. Baoer can live with Uncle first, okay? Baoer shook his head forcefully and said with puffed cheeks, no. Li Yingqiu was taken aback when she heard him. She said in a low voice, young master, did the child's mother say that she wants to bring him over? Yunyang shook his head and said, the child's mother only said that the child has grown up and it's about time for him to start learning. If he keeps staying here, I'm afraid. Li Yingqiu's expression was a little worried. What Yunyang had said was indeed a pressing issue, one that could not be ignored or avoided. How could they receive good education in such a small, isolated village? Yunyang said with a smile, what I mean is, I have enough space to stay there. I'll bring everyone in the village to move over, lest all of you worry about Baoer. I believe Baoer won't want to leave all of you. Li Yingqiu said happily, that would be the best. This was the crux of Li Yingqiu's hesitation. Of course, she could not bear to leave Baoer, but Baoer had to leave this small village if he wanted to receive good education. Li Yingqiu had already planned to follow Yunyang alone with Baoer, but Yunyang's declaration that he wanted to bring the entire village with him had eliminated Li Yingqiu's last doubt. Baoer pouted and said in a childish voice, is Mama there? Mama won't abandon Baoer, will she? It was obvious that the child had not realized the meaning behind Yunyang's words and was still pressing on with the question that concerned him the most. Yunyang said gently, Mama will go there to find Baoer when she comes back. Baoer is Mama's flesh and blood. How can she not want Baoer? Baoer lowered his head and said unhappily, but Baoer has dreamed a few times that Mama doesn't want Baoer anymore. They're walking in front. No matter how Baoer calls, they won't turn back. There was another update in the afternoon. Chapter 374. Yunyang continued reading. The child's real name is Yu Chengkuan, his nickname is Baoer. He's my baby. Baoer's innate talent isn't great, only having 5 innately awakened chakras. But that's fine too. I've always hoped that he can live his life peacefully. What followed was a lengthy description of the child. Then there were instructions for his brothers. Yunyang read it word by word until the end. If there are brothers who read this letter of mine, I'm afraid there won't be many of us left. I sincerely hope that the surviving brothers can live on happily. Don't be obsessed with revenge, don't be burdened with so many things. Live well, live well. Living is the greatest happiness. The child's keepsake is, he finished reading the will. Yunyang's heart grew heavier. He had called fourth brother for so many years, only now did he know that it should be fourth sister. No, it seemed more appropriate to call her sister-in-law. Then he thought of something. Hastily he read the entire will again. There was a paragraph that Yunyang had read for 17 to 18 times. In this life the person I've let down the most is my son. As a member of the royal bloodline, he can't enjoy any treatment of royalty. As a child with parents, he can't receive any care from his parents. As a descendant of the 9 Supremes, he can never show himself in front of others. Yunyang closed the will and heaved in a long breath, looking up at the sky. Supreme Water's will was not biased in any way. It only hoped that her and Supreme Earth's child could live out his life peacefully. It was a very plain sentence, but it was also a mother's greatest wish for her child. In spite of this, Yunyang could vaguely discern something else from the above paragraph. As a member of the royal bloodline, he could not enjoy any treatment of royalty. As a child with parents, he could not receive any care from his parents. As a descendant of the 9 Supremes, he could never show himself in front of others. Fourth brother. Fourth sister, no, it should be sister-in-law. Forget it, whatever you call me, it's fine. Yunyang chuckled humorlessly and fell into deep thought. Although fourth sister didn't express her intentions clearly and it's impossible for her to express them clearly, I can understand her desire to make it up to the child. Especially the resentment hidden in her words. It has a profound meaning. No wonder I am the one who can make her feel the most at ease. Fourth sister, don't worry. Yunyang said quietly, since you'll only be at ease if you hand the child over to me, and I'm the only one here among so many brothers, I'll help the child get everything. I understand what you and boss mean. The child's name was Yu Chengkuan. This name is enough for me to understand completely. His eyes suddenly shot out a sharp divine light, including what boss has obtained and lost. It also includes familial care and the identity of the 9 Supremes' descendant. One day I will make all of this known to the world. Otherwise, how can I be at ease? You, big brother, and the child, all of them. Yunyang carefully kept Supreme Water's will and kept it safe. The wills of his other brothers had basically been destroyed. Only Supreme Water's will could not be destroyed. Yunyang had other plans. He kept away the jade slit ring that contained the holy water charm cultivation method and the entry-level cultivation method of sacred wood conjuration. Then, he carefully kept the child's token into his spatial ring before taking a stroll around the residence of 9 Supremes reluctantly. There were still 3 rooms in the residence of 9 Supremes that had not been opened yet. The eldest was Supreme Earths, the second was Supreme Golds, and the third was Supreme Woods. Yunyang walked a few rounds in front of the 3 rooms, gazing at them affectionately. He then entered Supreme Water's room again and bid farewell silently as he breathed in the lingering scent in the air. Then he went to Supreme Flame's room, Supreme Thunder's room, Supreme Blood's room, and Supreme Wind's room, bidding them farewell one by one. For some reason, Yunyang still felt that his brothers were still there, waiting for him in their respective rooms. Whenever he came to the residence of 9 Supremes, he had to meet them before he left. "I'll be back very soon," Yunyang said softly. "I'll visit you the next time I come back, third brother." According to Yunyang's plan, cultivating the first stage of sacred wood conjuration would not take too long to complete. However, what Yunyang did not expect was that it would be a long time later when he left the residence of 9 Supremes and entered it again. Once Yunyang came out, he turned into a gust of wind and left immediately, eliminating any possibility of his presence being exposed. Perhaps it was because his emotions had yet to subside. Yunyang did not notice that the thick fog of the residence of 9 Supremes behind him was tumbling violently. For some reason, it was no longer as peaceful as it was before. The old soldiers who were guarding outside watched the unusual movement of the residence of 9 Supremes' clouds. Each of their faces was slowly filled with surprise, but it was soon replaced by joy. Someone from the 9 Supremes' lords has returned? I wonder if it's Lord Supreme Wind? Or perhaps another lord has returned. This is a joyous occasion, a joyous occasion. God bless the 9 Supremes, God bless you, Tom. After a long time, the churning fog above the residence of 9 Supremes gradually stopped. However, on this night, the fog of the residence of 9 Supremes stirred many people's imaginations, causing them to stay up all night. The residence of Yun. Lao Mei worked as a supervisor, supervising the work of the craftsmen meticulously. He wanted to restore every part of the residence of Yun to its original state as much as possible. Only the original flower rack was left untouched, as it had not suffered much damage and Yunyang had specifically instructed it to remain untouched. Therefore, the residence of Yun's territory was bustling with activity. Only a piece of empty land had become a no man's land. The craftsmen were surprised, not understanding why they were not allowed to go over. Was the residence of Heavenly Clouds not supposed to be rebuilt? Why was such a large piece of land left empty and unrepaired? The accumulated snow in the residence and the collapsed houses were all cleared within half a day. All kinds of high-level construction materials began to gather towards the residence of Yun. This was a classic case of money making things easier. Construction materials flowed like water and white mystical stones were piled up like mountains. What a generous sum of money. The reason why the craftsmen were puzzled as to why they did not start work on the original location of the flower rack was because in the residence of Yun, no matter where it was, work would start at the same time. There was no place that did not start. For this project, the craftsmen could be said to be full of enthusiasm. Not to mention the wages for starting work, just the parts that were already damaged and collapsed were directly cleared out, and all of them were discarded. The valuable materials in the ruins alone had made these craftsmen an extra windfall. The residence of Heavenly Clouds was the residence of the royal family and Marquis Yun himself was a trusted brother of Yutong's emperor. Although this relationship could not be stated explicitly, His Majesty the Emperor was clear about it. How could he mistreat this brother? When the residence was built, the materials used were all of superior quality. Even though most of it had been destroyed now, the leftover materials were still valuable. At least, these were high-level materials that the construction workers could not even come into contact with. Based on this mentality, the progress of the project was swift. Lei Dongtian's injury had yet to recover, but the foundation of the residence of Yun was almost complete. However, when Lao Mei wanted to ask Yunyang how to construct the underground, he realized that his young master could not be found no matter how hard he tried. Handing such a huge project to me, handing over hundreds of millions of silver taels to me, and he disappeared just like that? Isn't young master being too generous? Lao Mei was dumbfounded. This is obviously his trust in you. Why don't you know what's good for you? Fong Mafei hissed. Bullsh asterisk T. Lao Mei said impatiently, this underground construction was ordered by young master again and again. If I were to build it on my own and it doesn't meet the requirements, wouldn't I be the unlucky one then? Baishua swayed back and forth, rolling his eyes as he said, you're the major domo. Who would be unlucky if not you? Lao Mei was exasperated. Ever since Baishua entered the residence of Yun, his personality had become more and more similar to Dong Qianling's. In the beginning he was dressed in snow-white robes that fluttered in the wind. Now he was overflowing with a despicable aura that made people want to beat him up the moment he opened his mouth. All of this took less than a month. This is an unhealthy direction, my friend. You're really hurting our hearts by doing this. However, what kind of person was Lao Mei? It only took him a moment of inspiration to come up with a plan. These two people in front of him were taking pleasure in his misfortune. Since he could not count on them, he went to look for Shui Wuyin. He knew that Shui Wuyin was Yun Yang's absolute confidant and that his degree of trust seemed to be even higher than his own. Most importantly, Shui Wuyin's meticulousness was definitely not inferior to Yun Yang's. In some aspects he was even better. Finding such a person to help would only bring about benefits and no disadvantages. He was definitely the best choice. Using a secret communication channel to find Shui Wuyin and tell him about Yun Yang's plan, Shui Wuyin's eyes lit up immediately. Brilliant. This is the classic case of being blind under the light. Brilliant, truly brilliant. Shui Wuyin was extremely interested in the underground design of the residence of Yun. There was no need for Lao Mei to urge him as Shui Wuyin had already begun to design meticulously, to the point of forgetting to eat and sleep. Follow my plan. Shui Wuyin handed out a few blueprints after working for 4 hours. Let these 6 teams work on one side each. When they're all done, we'll complete the middle passage ourselves. This way we can ensure that it's completely undetected. Perhaps boss can come and clear it himself. Then there'll be no possibility of the secret being leaked. Brilliant. Brilliant, truly brilliant. Lao Mei's eyes were wide open. It was no wonder that he had been a martial artist all his life while people like Yun Yang and Shui Wuyin could command the masses. Even if he were to flatter his horse, he would never be able to catch up to the speed of their brains. Not only did they plan it in an instant, they even came up with an almost flawless way to keep it secret. Using this kind of brain to deceive people was simply too useful to the extent of not wanting to use it. Was there? Yun Yang did not return home after coming out of the residence of 9 Supremes but went straight to the address of the child that Supreme Water had mentioned. This matter was of utmost importance to Yun Yang and could not be delayed. He rushed all the way, and Chapter 375. It was not until he left Tiantang City and sprinted thousands of miles amidst the heavy snow that he entered the mountains and stepped into the child's current location. As far as the eye could see, the place was surrounded by mountains. It was a beautiful and quiet village. There were only 40 to 50 households in the entire village. Smoke rose from the roofs that were covered in snow in the evening, making the entire village look like a landscape painting, full of peace and harmony. Yun Yang swept down like a gust of wind. He landed on an exceptionally quiet yard, right in the middle of the village. Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath. This seemingly ordinary little village had a total of 49 households. However, it was not difficult for those with discerning eyes to see that the other 48 households had formed an unusually tight defensive formation, tightly surrounding and protecting the small courtyard in the middle. Along the way, Yun Yang acutely sensed that there were at least 20 divine senses scanning him, but they did not take any further action. Along the way he passed by 7 courtyards. In each courtyard, there was a strong man staring at him with a dangerous expression. There was also a woman doing needlework at the doorway. Her pretty eyes seemed to sweep over him intentionally or unintentionally. The door of his target's yard was tightly shut. Just as Yun Yang was about to knock on the door, he heard a creak. The doors of the 2 households beside him opened at the same time, and 2 strong men walked out slowly. His face was full of wariness. May I ask what brings this young master here? Every single person in the village had a valiant aura around them. Yun Yang could easily smell the scent of blood that came from stepping foot on the battlefield from them. He looked in the direction of the voice and saw 2 burly men walking out. One of them had an empty left sleeve, and the other seemed to be limping a little, but it was not very obvious. Yun Yang smiled warmly. May I know from which military camp did the 2 of you come from? The 2 men looked at him warily and said, We don't quite understand what young master means. We brothers are only hunters in the mountains. Have we ever joined the army or been a soldier? Yin Yang smiled. Have you not? It seems that I have misunderstood. I am here to visit my nephew. Your nephew? The two men frowned and asked in surprise. My nephew's nickname is Bauer. Do you know him? Yunyang asked. Bauer? The two men became even more vigilant and shouted, Who are you? Yunyang sighed and took out a jade pendant with a flick of his wrist. Hurry up and take out the token. If I don't reveal my identity, I'm afraid that those two people are going to make a move. It'll be bad if someone gets hurt. It's fine if I get hurt, but what if those two big men get hurt? This was a man who was loyal to the extreme and would give his all to protect boss's child. Yunyang would feel heartache even if a single strand of hair were to fall. The two burly men took the jade pendant and looked at it. Suddenly they heaved a sigh of relief. So it's one of us. Don't blame us. Yunyang kept the jade pendant and said with a smile, Those who don't know are not to be blamed. All of you are concerned about my nephew's safety. How is it strange? I wonder where Bauer is now. Calculating the time, Supreme Water had written his will a year and a half ago. Now Bauer should be 2.5 years old, able to run, walk, and build his foundation. However, a little boy who was not even 3 years old had lost his parents. Yunyang could not help but feel a pang in his heart when he thought about it. Bauer is at home. He's very obedient. The two burly men couldn't help but smile dotingly. This year Bauer's strength has increased a lot, and she's also smarter. As they spoke, one of the men ran over and knocked on the door. Nanny Lee, open the door quickly. There's an important guest. A woman's gentle voice said in surprise, Is Bauer's mother here? Hurried footsteps could be heard. Then the door was opened. A woman in her 30s who was thin but still attractive appeared in front of him, her face full of joy as she stretched her head to look around. Thinking that the person whom she was looking forward to would probably never come, Yunyang felt a pang in his heart again. He spoke telepathically, Is this big sister Liingqiu? The woman was taken aback when she heard him before she smiled. So this young master is an important guest. Please come in. Yunyang's words were spoken through telepathy. Everything was done for the sake of safety. In this world, there were only two people who knew this woman's real name: Supreme Earth and Supreme Water. Therefore, how could the lady not know that her own people had really come after hearing Yunyang's words? It was someone whom Supreme Earth and Supreme Water could absolutely trust. Bauer, come out quickly. A handsome uncle is here. Liingqiu chuckled. The thick curtain of the door was lifted and a little head that looked like it had been carved from jade poked out. His round eyes looked at Yunyang as he asked shyly, Mother didn't come? Disappointment that could not be concealed flashed in his dark eyes. He put down the curtain unhappily but felt that it was a little rude, so he lifted the curtain again and said, Good day, guest. Only then did he shrink his head back. Yunyang took a liking to this obedient, adorable and sensible child at first glance. He was pretty, clean, adorable, well-behaved, shy and polite. The only thing lacking about him was that he was a little too skinny. This child yearns for his mother to come every day. Every time his mother comes, it's like he can't get enough of her kisses, Liingqiu said tenderly. Yunyang felt a twinge in his heart. He smiled and said, It's the nature of a mother and son. It's only natural for a child to be like this. There's nothing strange about it. Liingqiu looked at his expression and asked hesitantly, This? The child's mother has never brought outsiders here before. What I mean is, why didn't the child's father and mother come this time? Yunyang sucked in a deep breath and said, They went to a faraway place to carry out a mission. I'm afraid they'll only be back after quite some time. Liingqiu frowned and said quietly, I see. They're always so busy. After a pause, she asked again, May I ask young master's surname? Yunyang pondered for a moment and said tentatively, My surname is Feng, which means favorable weather. Liingqiu's eyes shone as she said, The surname Feng is rare indeed. I remember the child's father once said that he had a brother with the same surname. Yunyang smiled and said, That would be me. Among Big Brother's brothers, only I have the surname Feng. Liingqiu's remaining wariness disappeared as she invited Yunyang into the house warmly. Big Brother Nyo, Big Brother He, if you have the time, why don't you hunt some wild game for me? I'll prepare a few dishes to entertain our esteemed guests tonight, Liingqiu said as she turned around. The two burly men laughed. Is there even a need to ask? We'll go with a dozen of us later and hunt more wild game. They turned around and left, guffawing. Yunyang looked at the retreating silhouettes of the two men, his thoughts wandering subconsciously. It seemed that Big Brother and Fourth Sister had not told them his real identity. Even Liangqiu did not know that the child's parents were actually two of the 9 supremes. If he had told them, they would have known who the person in front of them was when he said that his surname was Feng. Just as he entered the house, he felt a gust of warm air blowing against him. Bauer snuggled into Liangqiu's embrace shyly and said, "Uncle, who are you? Where are my papa and mama? Why didn't they come? Bauer misses them so much." In his small hand was a thin but exquisite wooden sword. Yunyang looked at the carving marks and knew that it was Supreme Water's handwriting. The material was the same as the wooden statue he had seen earlier. Yunyang chuckled softly and asked, "Bauer misses papa and mama?" Bauer nodded vigorously. "Yes." Yunyang smiled. "How much?" Bauer rolled his eyes and said, "I even dreamt of mama last night. It's so warm in mama's embrace, warmer than the stove." Yunyang was close to tears as he said, "Bauer's papa and mama have gone to a faraway place. They'll only be back after a very, very long time. Bauer can live with uncle first, okay?" Bauer shook his head forcefully and said with puffed cheeks, "No." Liangqiu was taken aback when she heard him. She said in a low voice, "Young master, did the child's mother say that she wants to bring him over?" Yunyang shook his head and said, "The child's mother only said that the child has grown up and it's about time for him to start learning. If he keeps staying here, I'm afraid." Liangqiu's expression was a little worried. What Yunyang had said was indeed a pressing issue, one that could not be ignored or avoided. How could they receive good education in such a small, isolated village? Yunyang said with a smile, "What I mean is, I have enough space to stay there. I'll bring everyone in the village to move over, lest all of you worry about Bauer. I believe Bauer won't want to leave all of you." Liangqiu said happily, "That would be the best." This was the crux of Liangqiu's hesitation. Of course, she could not bear to leave Bauer, but Bauer had to leave this small village if he wanted to receive good education. Liangqiu had already planned to follow Yunyang alone with Bauer, but Yunyang's declaration that he wanted to bring the entire village with him had eliminated Liangqiu's last doubt. Bauer pouted and said in a childish voice, "Is Mama there? Mama won't abandon Bauer, will she?" Obviously, the child had not realized the meaning behind Yunyang's words and was still pressing on with the question that concerned him the most. Yunyang said gently, "Mama will go there to look for Bauer when she comes back. Bauer is Mama's flesh and blood. How can she not want Bauer?" Bauer lowered his head and said unhappily, "But Bauer has dreamed a few times that Mama doesn't want Bauer anymore. They walk in front, no matter how Bauer calls, they don't turn back." There was another update in the afternoon. Chapter 376. Yunyang's heart skipped a beat as an indescribable emotion welled up within him. Looking at Bauer's innocent face and his eyes that were filled with endless desire, Yunyang swallowed the bitter wine in his mouth slowly, speechless. "Big brother, fourth sister, can you really bear to leave us behind? Can you really bear to leave your own children behind?" That night, Yunyang let go of everything and got drunk in this remote village. A few men from the village surrounded Yunyang, urging him to drink. Each of them was a forthright person, emptying their cups of wine. Naturally, there was no good wine or food in this remote, deserted village. However, Yunyang drank with relish, enjoying himself. Exquisite toys were given out one by one, and it only took a moment for Bauer to be so happy that he snuggled into his embrace and sat on Yunyang's knees, wriggling in his embrace like a kitten, full of affection. It was unknown if the little fellow was naturally introverted or if it was due to environmental factors, but he did not speak much. Even if he was very happy, he did not show it. The little person hugged his favorite toy, his eyes squinting into slits, but he kept his mouth shut, unlike other children who were overjoyed. His tiny hands kept fiddling, but each time he fiddled with it, the corners of his eyes curled up in delight. Yunyang's heart was filled with tenderness as he watched, wishing that he could hold the little person in his embrace for a long time. The next day, Yunyang walked out of the small village. Bauer held his hand and sent him off reluctantly, carrying a small white kitten in his embrace. It was Whitey 4. Yunyang had purposely left an eclipse panther for Bauer to protect himself. Of course, everyone thought that it was just an ordinary pet cat. Other than praising Yunyang for his meticulousness in his actions and the fact that he had brought such a living creature with him after such a long journey, it was truly thoughtful of him. Besides, Yunyang had also left 5,000 silver taels worth of banknotes. It was not that Yunyang did not want to keep it, but in such a desolate place, there was nothing he could buy even if he had the money. Showing off his wealth too much would only cause him trouble. Yunyang did not wish to see this bunch of honest and loyal men fight over a few silver taels. That would be contrary to Yun Yang's intention. It would not be too late to slowly compensate them after the arrangements were made and everyone had moved to Tiantang City to see more of it. Uncle Feng, will you still come to see Bao Er? Bao Er raised her head and asked innocently. I will. I'll come again very soon. When I come again we'll move into the city together. Yun Yang squatted down and smiled. There's so much fun to do there. I guarantee that Bauer will like it. Bauer caressed the obedient Whitey 4 in her arms lovingly and said, Why is it called Whitey 4? Are there 3 more Whiteys in front? Yun Yang guffawed. Bauer is so smart. There are really 3 more Whiteys in front of us. When you go to the city you will see the rest of them. Even when Yun Yang had gone far away, Bauer's lonely body was still looking around at the village entrance. His face was filled with reluctance. Since he was young, no one had treated him so well other than his parents. Everyone in the village, including Liang Qiu, had treated Bauer like a young master. No one had dared to show him the care and concern of an elder like Yun Yang. Bauer was reluctant but he dared not ask Yun Yang to stay. Uncle Feng has something important to do. Bauer comforted himself. He'll come to see me with Papa and Mama very soon. Whitey 4, who was in his arms, meowed in the direction Yun Yang had left. Why me? Why not Whitey 2? Why not Whitey 3? Why not Whitey 5? Bauer felt so wronged. Bauer hugged Whitey 4 and caressed it gently, comforting it. Whitey 4, don't worry. When Uncle comes again we'll go back. You can go wherever you want to play then. Whitey 4 meowed. Bauer said, We'll play together in the future. You can't ignore me. We're good friends, aren't we? Whitey 4 meowed arrogantly and turned its head away, meowing. I'm not interested in coaxing a child. You've agreed. That's great, that's great. Bauer rubbed it excitedly, trying his best to please Whitey 4. Whitey 4 stretched its legs out in grief, thinking, I'm against it, alright? If you don't understand, just say so. Don't make wild guesses. How suffocating. He had finally found Supreme Earth's flesh and blood. Yin Yang finally felt a little more at ease. In spite of this, he still dared not face Bauer's pure gaze, especially when Bauer asked with his head raised, Uncle Feng, when will my Papa and Mama come to see me? How long is very long? Yin Yang felt his soul trembling. When will your Papa and Mama come to see you? I'm sorry, child. The most I can give you is a grandfather who loves you completely and spoils you to the heavens, but your Papa and Mama, I really can't do anything. He left the village. Yun Yang turned into the wind and scouted the surrounding 1,000 miles. He then sat alone on the snow-covered hill, thinking quietly. He only returned when it was dusk. The wind blew in Tiantang City. The old marshal was looking at the map in silence in his study, planning for the war in the east. Suddenly the wind blew. A silhouette landed in front of him. There was not even a crack in the window, but this figure seemed to have appeared out of thin air, appearing here without any warning. Supreme Wind? The old marshal was pleasantly surprised. You're a rare guest. Why have you come to this old and useless one so suddenly? This honored one has come today to discuss an important matter with old marshal alone. Yun Yang lowered his voice, the voice that spoke with Supreme Wind's usual accent. What is it? The old marshal said happily, as long as it's Lord Supreme Wind's order, this old man will obey it. This was a joke, but it was also the old marshal's true thoughts. Under the black cloak, Supreme Wind's unique voice was as usual as he spoke slowly. Old marshal is too courteous. It's just that even this honored one is in a dilemma and it's hard for me to make a decision. That's why I've come to consult old marshal abruptly. I hope old marshal will forgive me for coming in the middle of the night due to the importance of this matter. Qiu Jianhan turned serious upon hearing the old marshal's words. The matter that even Lord Supreme Wind found troublesome and needed someone's help was no trivial matter. While he was feeling solemn, there was also a sense of pride that surged into his heart. There were not many people in the entire empire of Yutong who could receive such trust. Lord Supreme Wind, please speak. No matter what the final outcome is, this old man will keep my mouth shut from the beginning until the end. I won't leak anything. Obviously, old Marshal Qiu had understood Supreme Wind's intention. The matter was so important that he had come in the middle of the night. These 8 words were enough to explain some things. Other than the matter being important, it was also pressing and needed to be resolved as soon as possible. Qiu Jianhan dared not be negligent. His intention to assist with all his might was even stronger. Yun Yang considered his words and said, this matter concerns the head of the 9 Supremes, Supreme Earth. Old Marshal Qiu's solemn expression changed at once, a hint of caution added to it. Perhaps others did not know, But the old marshal was one of the only 3 people in this world who knew about it. Supreme Earth, His Majesty the Emperor's eldest son. His Highness the eldest prince. What is it? The old marshal asked seriously. Recently, I've received supreme waters will by chance. Yun Yang said in a low voice, the things mentioned in the will have thrown me into confusion. While I was overjoyed, I was uncertain and hesitant to make a decision. Old Marshal Chiu sat up straight, his posture upright. He, who was experienced in the ways of the world, could already tell that this matter was much bigger than what he had initially imagined. Yun Yang had suddenly mentioned Supreme Water, but he did not mention the main character, Supreme Earth. It was obvious that this matter involved both Supreme Earth and Supreme Water, 2 of the 9 Supremes. It was no small matter. My 4th brother, Supreme Water, is a woman and has tied the knot with my eldest brother, Supreme Earth. They are husband and wife. Yun Yang's words were earth-shattering. Even though the old marshal was somewhat mentally prepared, he still stood up abruptly, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. His usually upright and steady body was actually trembling. This was an earth-shattering secret. The old marshal wanted to say something, but his lips quivered a few times. He could only stare fixedly at Supreme Wind in front of him, waiting. Regarding eldest brother and 4th sister becoming husband and wife, the rest of US brothers didn't know about it. I only found out about it after reading the will. Other than this, I've also found out about something else. Yun Yang lowered his voice and enunciated each word clearly, that is, they left a bit of bloodline in this world, a 2.5-year-old boy. The old marshal felt as if his head had exploded. He stood up with a swoosh, almost unable to believe his own ears. What did you say? Supreme Wind nodded lightly. The old marshal's body swayed, almost falling back onto his seat. At this moment he was seeing stars. His body swayed and he couldn't stand steadily. He almost fainted from the shock of this sudden news. He understood the importance of this news better than anyone else. This was a super bomb that could shake the nation's foundations. This child's identity was extremely important to them. The royal bloodline. The eldest son and grandson. And it was the bloodline of the 9 Supremes. The existence of this child was a supreme presence in the Empire of Yutong. Not only did he possess an incomparable honor from his birth, there was also His Majesty's deep remorse towards his son and grandson. As long as he appeared, he would receive the reverence of the entire Yutong people and the help of Supreme Wind, the only remaining Supreme Wind among the 9 Supremes. Supreme Wind was now standing in front of him because of this matter. One could imagine how much Supreme Wind valued this child. He was ready to risk his life for him. Supreme Wind's call was equivalent to the entire military. Which of Yutong's soldiers had not been saved by the 9 Supremes before? By then, the military, the government, and the people would all be at their beck and call. However, the Empire of Yutong already had a crown prince, the rightful heir to the Empire of Yutong's throne. The Empire of Yutong was now surrounded by enemies. The external pressure was extremely dangerous, to the point of being besieged on all sides. If this news were to be released at this delicate moment, it would be equivalent to a super bomb that was destined to explode in the Empire of Yutong. It would definitely stir up 1,000 ripples. The 3rd update has arrived. The 4th update is being written, estimated to be around 8 o'clock at night. Chapter 377. However, at this time, especially when the Empire of Dongxian was about to attack, the Empire of Yutong could no longer withstand any internal turmoil. If things went awry, the Empire of Yutong would collapse from the internal and external conflicts that would erupt at the same time. The old marshal thought of too many things at once. It was like a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. His joy froze instantly as he stood dumbfounded on the spot, speechless for a moment. Opposite him, Yun Yang stood quietly, not saying a word as he waited for the old marshal's reaction. Qiu Jinhan's reaction was within Yun Yang's expectations. How could Yun Yang not know what this old general, who had dedicated his entire life to the Empire of Yutong, was thinking about? In fact, Yun Yang had already thought about it. This was also the main reason why Yun Yang could not make a decision. However, he had to know about this, to know about it before His Majesty the Emperor did. Lord Supreme Wind, may I ask what you want to do? After a long silence, Qiu Jinhan finally snapped out of it and asked with a stutter. It's really not what I want to do. Yun Yang said calmly, the name Supreme Earth has given to the child is Yu Qingkuan. The old marshal's body trembled. How could he not understand the deep meaning behind this name? Qiu Jinhan was silent for a moment before he suddenly sighed and said, I want to read that will. This was something that should be done. Although it was obvious that he did not believe Supreme Wind's words and might cause Supreme Wind's displeasure, after all, Yutong's higher-ups had never doubted the Nine Supremes' words. However, the old marshal had still said it despite knowing that it would be a hindrance. Yunyang was not offended at all and handed the will, which consisted of 5 pieces of paper, to the old marshal without hesitation. At the same time he activated the holy water charm. With a flash of blue light, faint blue words slowly appeared on the white paper. This was the Nine Supremes' unique anti-forgery mark. Only by using one's own cultivation method to open one's will could one see the words written on it. Actually, the old marshal was already 90% convinced of what Supreme Wind had just said when he saw how Supreme Wind had demonstrated Supreme Water's unique mystique with a wave of his hand. However, as his thoughts spun, his expression changed as he turned to look at Yunyang. Lord Supreme Wind, may I ask if the Nine Supremes' cultivation methods are all in your hands now? Yunyang was silent for a moment before he said quietly, as long as I'm here, the Nine Supremes are still here. Not a single one is missing. That's great. The Nine Supremes didn't disappear after all. The old marshal was relieved. The Nine Supremes have never disappeared. Yunyang said coldly, I am the Nine Supremes. Qiu Jianhan looked at him deeply. Yunyang's words were concise and concise. However, Qiu Jianhan savored the words and heaved a long sigh. This old man understands? Then he lowered his head to study Supreme Water's will. Some of Supreme Water's state of mind, some obscure thoughts in his will. To someone as experienced as the old marshal, he only needed one look to see through it. However, it was also because of this that the old marshal did not speak for a long time after he finished reading the will. This night, the moments of silence were much longer than the time both of them had spent conversing. Is there a letter from the eldest prince? Old Marshal Qiu asked. He had subconsciously replaced the will with a letter. To the old marshal, he still did not wish for the eldest prince to pass away, even though it was already a fact, a reality. I haven't gotten it yet. Yunyang said bluntly, with my ability, I can only get what fourth sister Supreme Water left behind. I can't get eldest, second and third brothers' unique cultivation methods for now, but I'll be able to after some time. If there's a need I'll send it to Old Marshal and His Majesty. Yunyang made a promise that was uncertain. After all, Yunyang still did not know what the contents of the eldest's will were. If it involved some of the Nine Supreme secrets, he could not pass it on to the Old Marshal and His Majesty. This was something that could not be discussed. Eldest Supreme Earth was the only one who knew about the other 8 Supremes' background. Qiu Jianhan nodded and rolled up the will carefully and passed it back to Yunyang. Yunyang had been staring at the will closely. Although the Old Marshal was one of the people he trusted absolutely, the matter mentioned in the will was too significant and could easily shake the empire of Yutong. Yunyang had no confidence whether the Old Marshal would take any other action. No matter how proud he was of his intelligence, the Old Marshal's life experience was not something Yunyang could compare to. It was only when the will was in his hands that Yunyang heaved a sigh of relief. Qiu Jianhan looked at the will in Yunyang's hands and did not speak for a long time, his expression changing. After almost the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he finally spoke again. If His Majesty knows about this, I'm sure he'll be very happy. These words were spoken with a profound meaning, as if there was a hidden meaning behind them. Yunyang did not speak or move, he did not respond at all, as if he had heard nothing. This child has Lord Supreme Wind as his backing. How lucky he is. Qiu Jianhan closed his eyes. Yunyang said faintly, I should be the lucky one. From the moment I found out about his existence, I truly understood my future path. My path ahead isn't only about revenge. I should be thankful to this child. I've always known what I've been doing and I know that there's something wrong with my mentality, that it's slowly drifting towards extremes. However, it's because of this child's appearance that I have the chance to be his backing and at the same time, it's given me a new goal in life. Otherwise, my path ahead would only be bloody, it's nothing but a path of blood. The words were hard to pronounce but Qiu Jianhan understood it completely. His brothers had died and he was the only one left. Shouldering the debt of those who had sacrificed their lives, he could only try his best to move forward on this path of blood. However, the appearance of the 2 Supreme Sun had caused Supreme Wind's destiny to deviate. It was no longer just about revenge. Yunyang's eyes glinted coldly like a sharp sword. If the 9 Supremes were still here and all of them were this child's backing, that would be his true fortune. Qiu Jianhan said, It looks like Lord Supreme Wind has already decided what to do. Yun Yang raised his head and said solemnly, "Indeed." Old Marshal Chiu paced back and forth, one hand behind his back as he pondered with a frown. Yun Yang sat down on the chair without any reservations and said, "This reputed one would like to ask Old Marshal a few questions, if I may be so bold." Chiu Jianhan asked, "What questions?" Yun Yang said, "Please answer honestly, Old Marshal. Don't try to hide it. If Old Marshal is unwilling to answer, just be direct." Chiu Jianhan could vaguely guess what the person before him wanted to ask. His expression turned ashen as he said in a low voice, "Ask away." Yun Yang took a deep breath and said, "What does Old Marshal think of the current Crown Prince?" Chiu Jianhan was silent for a moment before he said, "The Crown Prince is thorough in his considerations and is adept at winning people's hearts. He has considerable attainment in the art of being an emperor, even better than His Majesty back then." Yun Yang rolled his eyes and said, "If the Crown Prince succeeds the throne, what will happen to Yutang's future?" Chiu Jianhan fell into silence this time. After a long while he said, "Perhaps. Yutang will not be lost. Perhaps." Yun Yang said faintly, "Old Marshal, if you don't want to answer, just don't. Why do you have to say something that goes against your conscience? The Crown Prince is lenient on the outside but wary on the inside. He has a benevolent face but a dark heart. He thinks that he's good at wielding power, that he has the heart of an emperor, that he can win over the civil and military officials in the imperial court, that he's brilliant in handling matters. But what is the truth? Not to mention how many civil and military officials in the imperial court are truly loyal to him, he's resolute in handling matters. Old Marshal, do you think that my evaluation is accurate?" Chiu Jianhan's expression was grim as he said, "Half of it." Yun Yang chuckled. "Only half of it? I only want to ask Old Marshal, if such a person really ascends to the throne, as the saying goes, a new ruler brings a new court of ministers. How many virtuous people does the Crown Prince have under him? How many capable generals are there? Is there an honest and upright official? Once the Crown Prince ascends the throne, the Crown Prince's subordinates will rise with the wind. By then, does Old Marshal still think that Yutang will not be lost?" Chiu Jianhan's expression was grim, but he had to admit that what Yun Yang said was true. Reality was so helpless. Although there were treacherous officials and spies from other countries among His Majesty's subordinates, most of the officials were still loyal. For example, Chiu Jianhan, Leng Daoyin, Fang Qingtian, Tai Jing, Fu Baogua, the Shengguan family of generals, and so on. However, the Crown Prince did not have a single person like that. They were all people who wanted to flatter him. Occasionally there were a few capable ones, but they were all lowly officials who could not be of great use. Just like what Yun Yang had said, there was not even a single upright official, let alone a brave general. Although the Old Marshal wanted to protect the Crown Prince, he could not speak against his conscience. He had nothing to say. If His Majesty were to return in 100 years and the Crown Prince were to ascend the throne, the only way to ensure a few years of peace for Yutang would be to cut off the land and seek peace, hiding in a corner. However, Yutang's geographical location is unique. Once we don't think about improving, we'll definitely be devoured by other countries. The so-called few years of peace would only be a slow suicide. In the end, when an overlord emerges to unify the world, Yutang might not even be able to wait for that to happen. We'll be long annihilated in the war to unify Tianxian. Yun Yang said sharply, "This is the best outcome. It's also the limit that the Crown Prince can reach if he truly works hard for this country." Chiu Jianhan heaved a long sigh without saying a word. The words spoken by the person before him were extremely unpleasant to hear, but they hit the nail on the head and hit the nail on the head. In fact, how could Chiu Jianhan not be able to tell? Not only him, he, his brothers, Leng Daoyin, Fang Qingtian, and the others had already discussed these matters many times in secret. Even His Majesty the Emperor had spoken to Old Marshal Chiu about this. However, it was a fact that the royal family had no successor. It was a foregone conclusion. They had the will but lacked the strength to do anything. They could only sigh helplessly. Not only was it safe for the outside world, but it was also prosperous for the inside world year by year. During his reign, he made great efforts to govern the country, sharpen the army, and achieved all kinds of political achievements. He was indeed a wise ruler. Yun Yang's voice was slow as he spoke. The late emperor protected and developed a beautiful land, leaving it for the current emperor. That's how the current emperor has built his foundation. As for the current His Majesty, he was like a dragon or a tiger, with great talent and bold vision. He set his sights on the present and had a broad view of the world. The famous officials and generals under his command were full of talents. Even when the 5 empires came to fight at the same time and there was the 4 Seasons Tower's internal strife, he was still able to defend the east and the west, dominate the north and south. The prestige of Yutong's empire still shook the world. However, His Majesty is already 51 years old this year. He has already passed the prime of his life. It is obviously impossible to complete the feat of ruling the world in the hands of the current His Majesty. However, the current His Majesty still has the strength to build an iron wall, to build a team that can conquer the world, and to pass it to a qualified successor. Yunyang said faintly, there is only one condition to be qualified. His successor must be outstanding enough and generous enough to be able to tolerate the team that the current His Majesty has painstakingly left behind to conquer the world, and to be able to control this group of proud generals and soldiers. As for these princes on the table now, Yunyang smiled faintly and enunciated each word clearly, to reach this standard, they are at least as far as the distance between the chair I'm speaking and the sun in the sky. The difference between heaven and earth. Old Marshal Chiu heaved another heavy sigh. The old man realized that other than remaining silent for a long time tonight, he was also sighing. It was as if the sighs of half his lifetime had ended today. Was there anything wrong with what Supreme Wind had said? There was nothing wrong at all. Every outcome that Supreme Wind had mentioned was the same outcome that the old marshal had thought about for many years, to the point where his hair had turned white from thinking about it. It was exactly the same as what he had said. Even if there was a team that could conquer the world, even if there was a talent that could rule the world, even if there was a kingdom that was as solid as an iron bucket, if this family business were to fall into the hands of a prodigal son, how could it end up so easily? Without a strong master, even if the kingdom was as solid as an iron bucket, it would not be as solid as a piece of paper. The team that could conquer the world would be disbanded by an unqualified successor. The talent that could rule the world would be disheartened by a fatuous ruler. The kingdom that was as solid as an iron bucket would be torn apart and unrecognizable under the random torment of the successor. Yutong's imperial court had gone through so many things and could still stand tall. Which one of them was not filled with pride? Which one of them was not brimming with pride? While there was no doubt about the loyalty of such virtuous officials and generals, how could they be controlled by a young emperor who had just ascended to the throne? And such a person, which one of them was not exceptionally sensitive? If the world was at peace, even if the young emperor was really a popinjay, it might not be a big deal if he replaced all these old fellows after ascending to the throne. Even before His Majesty died, he had purged a batch of the original group of people, leaving behind a team that his son could control so that the succession of the throne would be a common occurrence. The most ruthless imperial family could be merciless to their kin, what more their subordinates. However, Yutong was like a piece of juicy meat now, surrounded by enemies from all sides. Coveting from all sides. There were not enough virtuous officials and generals. How could they be so extravagant as to eliminate them for the sake of management and control? How could they do that? A team that could be controlled and a team that could conquer the world were two completely different things. One was in the sky, the other was on the ground. This was already a difference of heaven and earth. The team that the princess could build by then would probably be 2 levels lower than the team that could be controlled. Based on this calculation, the difference between the two was as wide as heaven and earth. Are you determined to do this? The old marshal asked weakly. Can't I do this? Shouldn't I? Yunyang asked in return. Can you guarantee that this child will have a grand plan in the future? Engulf the world? Better than the prince is now, better than His Highness the Crown Prince? Qiu Jianhan asked mockingly. I really can't guarantee this. Yunyang said, but don't we have you, old marshal? Qiu Jianhan said angrily, what does this have to do with this old man? You can do it, you should do it, that's your business. Why are you dragging this old man into this? Yunyang pursed his lips and said, I'm not talking nonsense with you. The princes now have grown up in an atmosphere of luxury and luxury. How would they know the sufferings of the people? They don't know the army, they don't know the generals, they don't know war. They only know how to scheme and deceive each other. That's why they can't succeed. Since we know where the root of the problem lies, how can we raise another one like this? Yunyang said, we can place the child in the army and nurture him carefully. How can that be? This old man can't do it to a 2-year-old child. The old marshal shook his head like a rattled drum. In times of peace we can, of course, emphasize literature and suppress martial arts because everything is for stability. It's for long-term stability. However, now that we're in a time of war, when the world's heroes are fighting for supremacy, we must emphasize both literature and martial arts. Martial arts must even be more important than literature. Yun Yang said, Old Marshal, as a general, you should be able to see this more clearly than I do. As for age, small sacrifices can't be avoided in order to achieve great things. Believe me, the child will be most grateful to Old Marshal's nurturing when the time comes. Qiu Jianhan nodded and said generously, there's no need to thank me. This old man will be comforted if I can have a good death then. Even if it's rare for me to have a good death, I'll still have to wait until the world is unified and the four seas are at peace. As long as I can see this continent finally becoming part of Yutong's territory, I have no regrets in dying. Yun Yang chuckled. When the hares are dead, the hounds will be cooked, and when the birds are dead, the bow will be put away. This was never a good phrase. It was a taboo between a ruler and a subject, but sometimes, this was the only way. Especially from the perspective of a ruler. When the world was at peace, it was indeed not a good thing to keep this bunch of proud soldiers who had walked out of the battlefield alive. Yun Yang could promise on behalf of the child, but Yutong's future monarch was not Yun Yang. Yutong's new monarch would never be willing to keep someone else's promise. This was the dictatorial instinct of a ruler who was in a superior position. Therefore Yun Yang could only smile without saying a word. Everything would depend on the future development. It was not that there were no brilliant monarchs who could bring peace to the world and pacify the people's hearts, but those were the categories of emperors throughout the ages. How could Yun Yang guarantee it? What do you want to do? Surely you have a general direction? Qiu Jianhan looked at Yun Yang with an amused gaze. With the general direction set, the old marshal returned to his role as the leader of the capital city's three rogues. Yutong's world should belong to the eldest. Even if he's gone now, his son is still here. It's only logical and appropriate for the son to inherit his father's legacy. Yun Yang enunciated each word clearly. Old Marshal Qiu opened his mouth to speak but was silent for a moment. After a while he said, I can understand what you're thinking, I can even express my personal approval. However, approval is one thing and reality is another. You should know that there are some things that you can't stop no matter how unwilling you are to see it happen. The child can still live a leisurely and happy life now, but if he were to really come to Tiantang City, I believe he'll encounter something terrible within a very short period of time. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.